A werewolf romance audiobook written by Obsidian Romance. This is an original story created for entertainment only. Prologue. The cold concrete pressed against Lyra's cheek as her vision blurred, crimson pooling beneath her broken body. The alley reeked of garbage and her own blood, the metallic taste flooding her mouth as she struggled for each rattling breath. Alpha Marcus's words echoed in her dying mind, "Weak wolves don't deserve to live." She had trusted him, loved him, and he had thrown her away like trash. Darkness crept in from the edges of her vision, her heartbeat growing fainter with each passing second. This was it, rejected, broken, and dying alone in the shadows where no one would find her until it was far too late. But then, through the haze of approaching death, she heard it. Footsteps. Deliberate. Powerful. Coming closer. A presence knelt beside her, radiating heat and an otherworldly energy that made her wolf whimper in recognition, though she was too weak to understand why. Strong hands lifted her head, and she caught the faintest glimpse of golden eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness. "You don't deserve this fate," a deep voice murmured, rich with an accent she couldn't place. "Sleep now, little wolf. When you wake, everything will have changed." She felt the sharp pierce of teeth at her throat, not to kill, but to mark. Power flooded through her veins like liquid fire, and her last conscious thought was of those golden eyes promising her a future she never imagined possible. When Lyra finally stirred 3 days later in her own bed with no memory of how she'd gotten there, the bite mark on her neck was already healed. But the scent of cedar and midnight storms lingered on her skin, and deep in her chest, she could feel it, a bond that shouldn't exist, connecting her to a stranger who had saved her life. And somehow, impossibly, she was no longer the weak Omega everyone believed her to be. Chapter 1. Lyra's fingers trembled as she traced the barely visible scar on her throat, standing before her bathroom mirror in the pre-dawn darkness. 3 days had passed since she'd somehow survived Marcus's attempt to kill her, though she still couldn't remember how she'd made it home. The pack doctor had declared it a miracle when she'd shown up for her mandatory check-in, completely healed with no explanation. But miracles didn't leave bite marks that tingled with otherworldly energy. The mark was small, just 2 puncture wounds that had healed into pale silver scars, but every time she touched it, electricity shot through her entire body. More disturbing was the scent that seemed to cling to her skin no matter how many times she showered, cedar and storms, wild and untamed, like nothing she'd ever encountered in the Moonridge Pack territory. "What happened to me?" She splashed cold water on her face, trying to focus. Today was the full moon gathering, and she'd have to face Marcus again. Face the alpha who had told her she was worthless before leaving her to die in that alley. The thought should have filled her with the usual terror and submission her Omega wolf demanded. Instead, something dark and powerful unfurled in her chest, and her reflection's eyes flashed gold for just a heartbeat. Lyra stumbled backward, heart racing. Omegas didn't have gold eyes. Only alphas. "Lyra!" Her roommate Beth's voice carried through the thin walls. "You're going to be late for breakfast duty. Right." Even if something impossible was happening to her, she still had to maintain the pretense of being the pack's weakest member. Lyra dressed quickly in her standard Omega uniform, loose gray clothes designed to hide any hint of femininity or strength, and braided her dark hair into the required submissive style. But as she walked through the packhouse corridors, she noticed things she'd never perceived before. The fear scent rolling off the other Omegas. The way the beta wolf's eyes tracked her movement with something that looked almost like wariness. And underneath it all, that persistent cedar and storm scent seemed to be calling to something wild inside her chest. In the kitchen, she mechanically prepared breakfast for the higher-ranking wolves, but her enhanced senses, when had they become enhanced, picked up every whispered conversation. Something different about her. Saw her eyes flash during training yesterday. Marcus has been asking questions about the night she disappeared. Lyra's hands stilled on the plates she was arranging. They were talking about her. But how could they sense changes she barely understood herself? Well, well. Look who decided to show up. The familiar cruel voice made her entire body go rigid. Alpha Marcus stood in the kitchen doorway, his pale blue eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. At 28, he was everything the pack valued: tall, muscular, ruthlessly dominant. He was also the male who had tried to murder her less than a week ago. "Alpha," she whispered, automatically dropping her gaze and baring her throat in submission. But the gesture felt wrong now, like she was betraying something fundamental about herself. Marcus moved closer, his presence filling the space around her. "You've been avoiding me, little Omega. That's not very respectful, considering everything I've done for you." Everything he'd done? Like rejecting her publicly? Like beating her unconscious? Like leaving her to die? That dark power in her chest pulsed again, and she caught Marcus's sharp intake of breath. When she glanced up, his nostrils were flared, and his eyes had gone wide with something that looked almost like fear. "You smell different," he said slowly, circling her like a predator. "There's something." He leaned in closer, inhaling near her throat. "What is that scent?" "Cedar and storms. Wild magic. A bond that defied every law of pack hierarchy." "I don't know what you mean, Alpha," Lyra managed, but her voice came out steadier than it had any right to. "Stronger." Marcus's hand shot out, gripping her chin roughly and forcing her to meet his gaze. "Don't lie to me, Omega. I can sense." The kitchen door slammed open with enough force to rattle the windows. Every wolf in the room immediately dropped to the ground in submission as the most powerful alpha energy Lyra had ever encountered flooded the space. But she didn't drop. She couldn't. Something inside her was responding to that presence with recognition rather than submission. Standing in the doorway was a man who looked like he'd stepped out of her darkest fantasies, tall and broad-shouldered, with black hair and skin that seemed to glow with otherworldly vitality. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch. Golden. Exactly like the ones she remembered from her dying moments in the alley. Those impossible eyes fixed on Marcus's hand gripping her chin, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Release her." The stranger's voice carried absolute authority, speaking with an accent that sounded ancient and definitely not from anywhere in North America. "Now." Marcus immediately let go, but his alpha pride wouldn't let him back down completely. "Who are you to give orders in my territory? I don't recognize your pack scent." The stranger smiled, revealing teeth that were just a little too sharp. "That's because I don't belong to a pack, wolf. I belong to something far older." His gaze found Lyra's across the room, and the moment their eyes met, that cedar and storm scent exploded around her. The mark on her throat began to burn with silver fire, and she felt an invisible thread snap taut between them, a bond that made every nerve ending in her body come alive. "Mine." The word whispered through her mind in his voice, though his lips hadn't moved. But before she could process what was happening, the stranger turned and walked calmly out of the kitchen, leaving behind only the lingering scent of magic in a small obsidian pendant on the counter where he'd been standing. Lyra reached for it with shaking hands, and the moment her fingers closed around the smooth stone, his voice echoed in her mind again, "The moon rises tonight, little wolf. When it does, you'll understand what you truly are. But beware, those who tried to kill you once are already planning to finish what they started." Chapter 2. The obsidian pendant burned against Lyra's palm as she fled to her room, her heart hammering so hard she was sure every wolf in the pack house could hear it. She locked her door and collapsed against it, struggling to process what had just happened. Who was he? The stranger's golden eyes haunted her thoughts, along with the impossible sense of recognition that had flooded through her when their gazes met. And that voice in her mind, telepathic bonds were sacred, reserved for true mates. But she was a rejected Omega, and he was, what exactly? His scent held no trace of wolf, yet his presence had commanded instant submission from every pack member except her. She stumbled to her mirror, staring at her reflection with growing alarm. Her plain brown eyes now held flecks of gold, and her skin seemed to glow with an inner light she'd never possessed. Even her hair looked different, richer, darker, as if the life had been breathed back into it. The pendant pulsed in her hand, warm and somehow alive. As she watched, faint symbols flickered across its obsidian surface, ancient runes that her human mind couldn't read, but something deeper inside her understood perfectly. Power. Protection. Possession. Mine. The word whispered through her consciousness again, and heat exploded through her entire body. Not the uncomfortable heat of embarrassment or fever, but something primal and electric that made every nerve ending sing with awareness. Her wolf stirred restlessly beneath her skin, no longer the weak, frightened creature she'd always known, but something wild and magnificent that wanted to break free. A knock at her door made her jump, quickly shoving the pendant beneath her pillow. "Lyra?" Beth's worried voice carried through the wood. "Are you okay? Marcus is looking for you, and he seems upset." Upset was likely an understatement. The alpha's pride had been wounded by the stranger's easy dominance, and he'd want to take it out on someone. Traditionally, that someone would be her. But as Lyra moved toward the door, she felt different. Stronger. The familiar Omega instinct to cower and submit was still there, but now it warred with something fierce and unyielding that refused to be broken again. "I'm fine," she called back, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "Tell the Alpha I'm not feeling well. I need to rest before tonight's gathering." There was a long pause. "Lyra, your scent. It's changed. What happened down there?" Before she could answer, another presence filled her awareness, familiar cedar and storms approaching the pack house with purposeful intent. Her mysterious stranger was coming back, and every cell in her body responded to his nearness with desperate hunger. "Come to me." His voice in her mind was a command she couldn't ignore. Not because she had to obey, but because she wanted to more than she'd ever wanted anything in her life. Lyra grabbed a jacket and slipped out through her window, landing silently in the garden below. Her enhanced senses, definitely enhanced now, guided her through the woods toward the edge of pack territory, where moonlight filtered through the canopy above. She found him standing in a clearing she'd never seen before, though she'd explored these woods countless times. Ancient stone pillars rose from the earth around him, carved with the same runes that had flickered across the pendant. This wasn't pack land anymore. This was somewhere else entirely. "You came," he said, turning to face her with a smile that made her breath catch. Up close, he was even more devastatingly beautiful, tall and lean with aristocratic features and skin that seemed to absorb and reflect moonlight. But it was his eyes that held her captive. Gold with depths that seemed to stretch into eternity. "I didn't have a choice," she whispered, then flushed at how desperate that sounded. His expression softened. "There's always a choice, little wolf. But some paths call to us more strongly than others." He moved closer, and she caught the full impact of his scent, cedar and storms, yes, but underneath that was something darker. More dangerous. Power that made her wolf whine with need even as her human mind screamed warnings. "What are you?" she asked, surprised by her own boldness. "Many things," he replied, reaching out to trace the line of her throat where his mark lay hidden. At his touch, silver fire raced through her veins, and she gasped. "But tonight, I am the one who saved you. The one who marked you. The one who will show you what you were always meant to become." The fever beneath her skin intensified, and she swayed toward him involuntarily. "I don't understand what's happening to me." "Your true nature is awakening," he murmured, his voice like silk in shadows. "The bite didn't just save your life, Lyra. It freed what was always locked away inside you." She shivered at the sound of her name on his lips, but managed to ask, "What's your name?" His smile turned predatory. "Kieran. Prince of the Shadow Court. Heir to the throne of the Dark Fae." Fae. That explained the otherworldly beauty, the ancient power, the way he'd appeared and disappeared like magic. But it also meant, "You're not a werewolf," she breathed. "No," he agreed, circling her slowly. "But you're not entirely wolf either. Not anymore." Before she could ask what he meant, voices echoed through the forest, Marcus and his betas, searching for her. Kieran's expression darkened, and the temperature plummeted. "They won't stop hunting you," he said quietly. "Not until they understand what you've become." "What we've become? What do you mean?" He stepped closer, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "The bond between us, little wolf. It's not just a bite mark or a telepathic connection. It's something that hasn't been seen in over 1,000 years, a true mate bond between Fae and wolf." The voices were getting closer now, and she could hear Marcus roaring her name in fury. Kieran's hand cupped her face, thumb tracing her lower lip. "When the moon reaches its peak tonight, you'll transform," he whispered against her ear. "But not into the wolf they expect. Into something magnificent. Something they'll never be able to control again." She wanted to ask more questions, needed answers that made sense of the chaos in her mind and body. But then his lips brushed her temple, and his voice filled her thoughts one final time. "You are mine, Lyra of the Moonridge Pack. Mine to protect, mine to cherish, mine to claim when you're ready to accept what you truly are." When she blinked, he was gone. Only his scent remained, wrapped around her like a promise, and the sound of Marcus crashing through the underbrush growing ever closer. But as the alpha and his wolves burst into the clearing, they found only an empty space and the lingering scent of magic that made their wolves whimper in instinctive fear. And somewhere in the darkness, a voice whispered, "Mine." Chapter 3. Lyra barely made it back to her room before the transformation began. It started as a tingling in her fingertips that spread up her arms like wildfire, followed by a pulling sensation deep in her chest, as if something was trying to drag her soul right out of her body. She collapsed on her bed, biting her lip to keep from crying out as her bones began to shift and reshape themselves. But this wasn't the familiar change from human to wolf. This was something else entirely. Power flooded through her in waves, each one stronger than the last, until she felt like her skin might split open from containing it all. Her vision sharpened until she could see individual dust motes floating in the moonlight streaming through her window. Her hearing amplified until she could distinguish every heartbeat in the packhouse 3 floors below. And through it all, Kieran's voice whispered in her mind, "Don't fight it, little wolf. Let yourself become what you were always meant to be." The bedroom door rattled as someone pounded on it. "Lyra!" Marcus's voice carried deadly authority. "Open this door. Now." She tried to answer, but only a growl emerged from her throat. Her body was burning from the inside out, every nerve ending alive with sensation. The mark on her throat pulsed in rhythm with her racing heart, and she could swear she felt Kieran's presence surrounding her even though he was nowhere to be seen. "Break it down," Marcus ordered his betas. "No." The thought blazed through her mind with desperate intensity. "I won't let them see me like this. I won't be weak again." As if responding to her will, shadows began pouring from the corners of her room, not natural darkness, but something alive and protective that wrapped around her like a cocoon. The temperature dropped so suddenly that frost formed on her windows, and her scent changed completely, becoming something wild and otherworldly that made the wolves in the hallway whine with instinctive terror. The pounding stopped abruptly. Through the bond she barely understood, she felt Kieran's approval and something that might have been pride. "That's my girl. Now come to me." The command wasn't a compulsion this time, it was an invitation. and every fiber of her being yearned to accept it. Still wreathed in living shadows, Lyra moved to her window and looked down at the 3-story drop that should have been impossible for an Omega to survive. But she wasn't an Omega anymore, was she? She jumped. The landing was silent and graceful, her body moving with a fluidity she'd never possessed. The shadows clung to her as she ran through the forest, following an invisible thread that pulled her deeper into the woods than she'd ever ventured before. The trees grew stranger as she ran, taller, more twisted, with bark that seemed to shift and writhe in her peripheral vision. The very air tasted different here, thick with magic and ancient power. This wasn't the mortal realm anymore. She emerged into a vast clearing dominated by a circle of standing stones that hummed with otherworldly energy. But it wasn't the stones that made her breath catch, it was the palace that rose beyond them. Obsidian towers spiraled impossibly high into a star-filled sky that held 2 moons instead of 1. Gardens of silver flowers bloomed in defiance of the season, their petals glowing with soft luminescence. And everywhere she looked, beings that were definitely not human moved through the ethereal landscape with predatory grace. "Welcome to the Shadow Court," Kieran's voice whispered in her mind. "Welcome home." She found him waiting at the center of the stone circle, but he looked different here. More himself. His casual human glamour had been replaced by clothing that seemed to be cut from midnight itself, and a silver circlet rested on his dark hair. Power rolled off him in waves, ancient and untamed, making it clear that he was exactly what he'd claimed to be, a prince among his kind. "You're magnificent," he breathed as she approached, his golden eyes drinking in every detail of her transformation. Lyra looked down at herself and gasped. Her skin had taken on an otherworldly luminescence, and her hair now fell in waves of deepest black shot through with silver. But it was her reflection in a nearby pool that truly shocked her, her eyes blazed with inner fire, gold and silver swirling together like liquid starlight. "What have you done to me?" she whispered, though she felt no fear. Only wonder and a deep sense of rightness, as if she'd finally become who she was always meant to be. "I've awakened your true heritage," Kieran replied, moving closer with fluid grace. "You're not just a werewolf, Lyra. You're descended from the first pack, the wolves who mated with Fae royalty over a millennium ago. Their bloodline was thought extinct." "But I'm an Omega," she protested. "The weakest of the weak." His laugh was like dark velvet. "Omega is a rank imposed by small minds who couldn't recognize true power. You were never weak, little wolf. You were dormant." He reached out to cup her face, and she felt the rightness of his touch all the way to her bones. "When I bit you, I didn't just save your life. I activated the Fae magic in your bloodline. Made you what you were always meant to become." "Which is?" His smile was pure sin and promise. "A queen." Before she could process that revelation, the sound of howling echoed across the otherworldly landscape. But these weren't wolf howls, they were something else entirely. Something filled with rage and ancient malice. Kieran's expression hardened. "They've found us." "Who?" "The ones who killed your ancestors," he said grimly, drawing her against his side as dark shapes began emerging from the forest. "The ones who've been hunting your bloodline for centuries, ensuring that no heir to the Shadow Queen's throne could ever rise again." Lyra's breath caught as the attacking creatures came into view, wolves, but wrong somehow. Their fur was the color of old blood, their eyes burned with unholy fire, and their howls carried the sound of damned souls. "Shadow hounds," Kieran explained tersely, already shifting into a battle stance. "Demons wearing wolf skins. They serve the one who ordered your family's extinction, and they'll stop at nothing to finish what they started." The largest of the creatures focused its burning gaze on her and spoke in a voice like grinding bones, "The halfling dies tonight. The prophecy will not be fulfilled." But even as terror tried to claw its way up her throat, Lyra felt something else rising within her, power beyond anything she'd ever imagined, wild and fierce and utterly unafraid. Silver fire danced along her fingertips, and when she looked at Kieran, she saw her own determination reflected in his golden eyes. "Let them come," she heard herself say, her voice carrying new authority. "I'm done running." Kieran's smile was fierce and proud. "That's my queen." But as the shadow hounds prepared to attack, a new voice cut through the night, familiar and filled with deadly intent. Well, Marcus stepped into the clearing, flanked by his strongest betas. But he looked different now, his eyes glowing with the same unholy fire as the demons. "Look what we have here. My little Omega, playing dress-up with monsters." Horror flooded through her as the truth became clear. "You're working with them." "Working with them?" Marcus laughed, the sound devoid of any warmth she remembered. "Little fool. I am one of them. Do you really think your assassination was random? I've been hunting your bloodline for 300 years, and I finally found the last heir hidden in plain sight." The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. The alpha she trusted, loved, served faithfully, he'd been her family's killer all along. But before she could fully process the revelation, Kieran stepped protectively in front of her, shadows coiling around him like living weapons. "You made one critical mistake, Shadow Hound," he said quietly, his voice carrying promise of violence. "You let me find her first." And as the battle erupted around them, Lyra heard Kieran's voice one more time, filled with ancient magic and unshakable conviction. "You survived the assassination attempt because you're no longer human, little wolf. Tonight, you discover what that truly means." Chapter 4. The battle erupted with supernatural fury. Kieran moved like liquid death, shadows streaming from his hands to engulf the nearest shadow hounds in writhing darkness. His fey magic clashed against their demonic energy, sending shockwaves through the clearing that made the ancient stones ring like bells. But Marcus had brought more than just his corrupted pack. A dozen shadowhounds materialized from the forest, their burning eyes fixed on Lyra with murderous intent. "Take the girl alive," Marcus commanded, his voice carrying the otherworldly resonance of his true demonic nature. "The Dark Master wants to drain her power slowly. Like hell." The thought blazed through Lyra's mind with surprising vehemence. Silver fire erupted from her fingertips, striking the nearest demon wolf square in the chest. The creature's howl of pain and surprise echoed across both realms as it dissolved into ash. Kieran's head snapped toward her, his golden eyes wide with amazement and something that looked like desire. "Magnificent," he breathed, even as he conjured a blade of pure shadow to cut down another attacker. But there were too many of them. For every demon they destroyed, two more seemed to take its place. Marcus circled them like the predator he'd always been, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "You can't protect her forever, Prince," the false alpha taunted. "She belongs to my master now. Her power will fuel his return to the mortal realm." "Over my dead body," Kieran snarled, his aristocratic mask falling away to reveal something primal and deadly underneath. "That can be arranged." Marcus lunged, his human form dissolving mid-leap to reveal his true shape, a massive wolf-like creature with burning coal eyes and fangs that dripped with acidic venom. He collided with Kieran in a tangle of claws and shadows, both of them crashing into the stone circle with enough force to crack the ancient pillars. Lyra started toward them, but three shadowhounds blocked her path, their lips pulled back in demonic grins. "Come quietly, little queen," one of them rumbled. "Your death will be swift if you don't fight." "I've got a better idea," she replied, feeling power build in her chest like a gathering storm. "Why don't you go back to whatever hell spawned you?" She unleashed everything she had, silver fire, shadow magic, and something else entirely. Something that felt older than both Fae and Wolf combined. The blast of pure energy vaporized all three demons instantly and kept going, carving a molten furrow through the forest beyond. The clearing fell silent except for the sound of Marcus and Kieran's continued battle. But Lyra barely noticed. She was staring at her hands in shock, watching silver and gold light dance across her skin. That power, where had it come from? It had felt like reaching into the heart of creation itself. The first magic, Kieran's voice whispered in her mind, strained but alive. The power that birthed both our races. You're not just fey-touched, little wolf. You're something far more rare. Before she could ask what he meant, a new presence filled the clearing, ancient beyond measure and so inherently wrong that every living thing in the vicinity began to wither and die. The Shadow Master had arrived. He appeared as a towering figure wreathed in darkness so complete it seemed to devour light itself. Where Marcus had been a corrupted alpha playing at being demon, this creature was the real thing, a primordial entity that had existed since before the first dawn. Enough, he commanded, and both Marcus and Kieran froze mid-strike. I will deal with the girl myself. Terror unlike anything she'd ever experienced flooded through Lyra's veins. This wasn't fear of pain or death, this was the cosmic horror of facing something that shouldn't exist, something that violated the very laws of reality. But even as her body trembled, that inner fire burned brighter. You killed my family, she said, surprised her voice remained steady. You've spent centuries hunting my bloodline. The Shadow Master's laugh was like the sound of dying stars. Your family was an abomination. Fae and wolf were never meant to breed. Their offspring threatened the natural order. What natural order? Kieran demanded, shadows coiling around him as he prepared for another fight. The one where demons like you prey on innocent mortals? The order where power remains in its proper place, the entity replied. Where creatures like her, he gestured dismissively at Lyra, don't exist to upset the balance between realms. Understanding crashed over her like a physical blow. You're not just hunting my bloodline. You're afraid of it. The Shadow Master's form flickered with rage. Afraid? Of a mongrel halfling who doesn't even understand what she is? Then enlighten me, Lyra challenged, feeling Kieran's pride through their bond. You are the key, the demon hissed. The one prophesied to either unite the supernatural realms or destroy them all. Your very existence threatens everything we've built. The prophecy. Kieran's mental voice was filled with awe and something that might have been reverence. You're the bridge walker. The one who can open passages between all worlds. Which is why you must die, the Shadow Master continued, raising one clawed hand. Dark energy began to gather around his fingers, not the clean shadows Kieran wielded, but something corrupt and poisonous that made the air itself scream. But before he could strike, Kieran stepped between them, his own power blazing like a silver star. If you want her, the Fey Prince said quietly, you'll have to go through me. The Shadow Master smiled, revealing teeth like broken glass. As you wish, boy. But know that when I'm finished with you, I'll make her watch as I drain every drop of her blood to fuel my army's march into the mortal realm. The two beings clashed with a sound like thunder, their combined energies threatening to tear holes in reality itself. But even as they fought, Lyra could feel something building inside her, a calling that pulled at her very soul. The prophecy. The choice between unity and destruction. And somehow, she knew that decision was coming sooner than any of them realized. Through the bond, she felt Kieran's desperate love and unwavering faith in her. Whatever happens, his voice whispered in her mind, remember that you're mine. And I am yours. Forever. The Shadow Master's power began to overwhelm Kieran's defenses, and Lyra felt her heart tear as she watched the male who'd saved her life start to fall. But just as the demon prepared to deliver the killing blow, silver light erupted from Lyra's body with enough force to knock everyone in the clearing to their knees. When the light faded, she was floating 3 feet off the ground, her eyes blazing with the power of stars, and her voice carried the authority of creation itself. You're mine, Kieran of the Shadow Court. Mine to protect, mine to save, mine to claim. And no force in any realm will take you from me. Chapter 5. The sacred grove materialized around them like a dream becoming reality. One moment Lyra was floating in the battle-torn clearing, power coursing through her veins like liquid starlight. The next, she and Kieran stood in a place that existed between worlds, ancient beyond measure, where trees of silver and gold reached toward a sky that held all the colors of creation. "Where are we?" she breathed, her feet finally touching solid ground again. "The Heart Grove," Kieran replied, his voice filled with reverence and no small amount of awe. "The birthplace of the first magic. I've never seen it before, only the most powerful beings can find their way here, and only when the realms themselves are in danger." The grove pulsed with life unlike anything in the mortal world. Flowers bloomed in impossible colors, their petals whispering secrets in languages older than civilization. A crystal-clear pool reflected not their faces, but glimpses of other times, other possibilities. And at the center of it all stood a massive tree whose trunk was carved with every symbol of power that had ever existed, runes of fey magic, wolf pack markings, demonic sigils, and others she didn't recognize but somehow understood. "The World Tree," Kieran whispered. "Legend says it holds the memories of every supernatural being who ever lived." But Lyra was no longer listening. Something was calling to her from the tree's base, a power so ancient and vast that her knees nearly buckled under its weight. She moved toward it as if in a trance, her hand reaching out to touch the carved bark. The moment her fingertips made contact, the world exploded into light and memory. She saw herself as she truly was, not Lyra the rejected Omega, but Lyra, last heir of the Shadow Queens, descendant of the first beings to bridge the gap between Fae and Wolf. Her bloodline stretched back through millennia, each generation more powerful than the last, until it reached the original queen who had united the supernatural realms in an age of peace. She saw the Shadow Master in his true form, not a primordial demon, but a fallen Fae lord who had been cast out of the courts for his cruelty. He had spent centuries building an army of corrupted creatures, waiting for the prophesied heir to emerge so he could steal her power and use it to conquer all the realms. She saw Marcus as he really was, not her alpha, but one of the Shadow Master's most trusted servants, placed in her pack specifically to watch for signs of her awakening. His rejection hadn't been personal cruelty but calculated manipulation, designed to keep her weak and unaware of her heritage. And she saw the prophecy in its entirety. When the Bridgewalker wakes to her power, she will stand at the crossroads of destiny. Unite the realms in harmony, and peace will reign for 1,000 years. Choose destruction, and all worlds will burn in endless war. The choice is hers alone, and the fate of every living being hangs in the balance. The visions ended, leaving her gasping and changed. Power flowed through her like never before, not just Fae magic or wolf strength, but something that connected her to every supernatural creature that had ever drawn breath. "Lyra?" Kieran's voice seemed to come from very far away. "What did you see?" She turned to face him, and he actually stepped back at whatever he saw in her eyes. "Everything," she whispered. "I saw everything." The grove began to pulse with energy, responding to her awakening. The flowers glowed brighter, the pool's surface showed images of supernatural beings all across the realms turning toward the Heart Grove as if sensing a disturbance, and the World Tree's runes blazed with silver fire. "It's starting," Kieran breathed. The final awakening. Pain unlike anything she'd ever experienced shot through every nerve ending as her body began to change one final time. But this wasn't the gentle transformation from human to wolf, this was evolution itself, her very DNA rewriting itself to accommodate the magnitude of power flowing into her. Her bones lengthened and strengthened. Her senses expanded until she could perceive not just the physical world but the magical currents that flowed between all realms. Her wolf nature merged seamlessly with newfound Fae abilities and something else entirely, the bridge magic that would allow her to open doorways between worlds. When the transformation finally ended, she stood at least 6 inches taller, her hair now a cascade of silver and black that seemed to move with its own inner wind. Her eyes blazed with swirling galaxies of gold and silver, and when she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that made the very air shimmer. "I remember now," she said, looking at Kieran with new understanding. Not just the visions from the tree, but everything. My mother tried to hide me from the Shadow Master by suppressing my memories and powers. She died protecting me. Kieran moved closer, his golden eyes filled with wonder and something deeper. You're magnificent. A true Shadow Queen, just as your ancestors were. But also something more, she realized, feeling the breadth of her abilities for the first time. The bridge magic is stronger in me than it was in any of my predecessors. I can do more than just open doorways between realms, I can fundamentally change how they interact with each other. The choice, Kieran said quietly. Unity or destruction? She nodded, already feeling the weight of that decision pressing down on her shoulders. Every supernatural being in every realm is going to be affected by what I do next. And the Shadow Master won't give up just because I've awakened. He'll come for me with everything he has. Then we'll be ready for him, Kieran replied fiercely. You're not alone in this, my queen. You have me, and through our bond, you have the entire Shadow Court. But even as he spoke, new voices began to whisper at the edges of her consciousness, not threatening, but urgent. Other supernatural leaders reaching out across the realms, some offering alliance, others demanding audience, and still others preparing for war. Word was spreading. The Shadow Queen had awakened. The grove began to fade around them as her power stabilized, preparing to return them to the world where their enemies waited. But just before they left the sacred space, Lyra caught a glimpse of something that made her blood run cold. In the crystal pool's depths, she saw armies massing in the mortal realm. Not just shadow hounds, but vampires, rogue fae, corrupted witches, and creatures she couldn't even name. All of them gathered under one banner, the Shadow Master's sigil. And leading them wasn't just Marcus, but other figures she recognized. Pack alphas who had shown her nothing but contempt. Supernatural leaders who had dismissed her as worthless. They were all working together. All part of the conspiracy to prevent her awakening. But what terrified her most was the sight of human military forces preparing alongside the supernatural army. Somehow, the Shadow Master had convinced mortal governments that she was a threat to be eliminated. The entire world was about to go to war over her existence. As the Heart Grove finally released them back to the Shadow Court's realm, Kieran's hand found hers. Whatever comes next, he said quietly, we face it together. She squeezed his fingers, drawing strength from their bond. Together, she agreed. But in the distance, carried on winds that smelled of blood and smoke, came the sound of war horns beginning to blow. The Shadow Master wasn't waiting for her to make her choice. He was forcing her hand. And somewhere in the darkness between worlds, a voice whispered with ancient malice, let the Bridgewalker choose quickly. For every moment she delays, more of her precious mortals die. Chapter 6. 300 miles away, in the Moonridge Pack territory, Beta Cain burst through the Alpha's office doors without bothering to knock. She's alive, he gasped, his face pale with terror and something that might have been awe. Marcus, she's not only alive, she's impossible. Alpha Derek Moonridge rose from behind his massive oak desk, his gray eyes flashing with deadly intent. Marcus assured me the Omega was dealt with. Her body should be rotting in that alley by now. Cain shook his head frantically. That's what we all thought. But the scouts I sent to clean up the scene, they found something else entirely. He placed a small silver pendant on the desk, its surface still glowing with residual fae magic. Derek's nostrils flared as the otherworldly scent hit him, and his wolf recoiled instinctively. Dark fae, Derek snarled. What the hell is this doing in our territory? There was a massive surge of power 3 nights ago, Cain continued, his voice growing more strained with each word. Every supernatural in a 50-mile radius felt it. The witches are calling it a royal awakening. And the scent signature. He swallowed hard. It matches Lyra's, but amplified 1,000 times over. Derek's massive fist crashed down on the desk, splintering the ancient wood. That's impossible. She was nothing. A weak Omega barely worth the effort it took to reject her. Marcus made sure of that. Marcus has been lying to us. The new voice came from the doorway, where Elena Shadowmere stood with her arms crossed and her green eyes blazing with fury. As the pack's premier tracker and Kane's mate, she rarely entered the Alpha's office unless summoned. I've been investigating the discrepancies in his reports, and what I found. She shook her head grimly. We've all been played. Derek's attention snapped to her with predatory focus. Explain. Elena stepped forward, placing a thick folder on the remains of his desk. Lyra wasn't just some random Omega who happened to catch Marcus's attention. Her bloodline goes back over 1,000 years, straight to the Shadow Queens of legend. That's a myth, Derek scoffed, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? Elena opened the folder, revealing genealogy charts, ancient pack records, and photographs of artifacts bearing the same runes as the pendant Kane had brought. Because according to these documents, Lyra's mother was the last known heir to the Shadow Court's royal line. She fled here when Lyra was an infant, seeking sanctuary. And you gave it to her, Kane added quietly, understanding dawning in his eyes. You knew, didn't you? That's why you agreed to take in a lone female with a baby. That's why you never questioned her story about being a widowed Omega seeking protection. Derek's silence was answer enough. Elena continued relentlessly. Marcus has been reporting to someone else this entire time. Someone who wanted the Shadow Queen's bloodline eliminated before the heir could awaken to her full power. The Shadow Master, Derek whispered, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. The Demon Lord who's been building an army in the Dark Realms. And now she's awakened, Kane said, gesturing to the still glowing pendant. The power surge 3 nights ago? That was her ascension. Lyra isn't a powerless Omega anymore. She's a supernatural queen with abilities we can't even comprehend. Derek began pacing behind his ruined desk, his wolf agitated and restless. Where is Marcus now? Gone, Elena replied grimly. Disappeared the same night as the power surge. But before he left, he cleaned out the pack's emergency funds and took several of our strongest fighters with him. Traitors, Derek snarled. All of them. There's more, Kane said reluctantly. The scouts report unusual movement in neighboring territories. Packs that have been our allies for decades are suddenly mobilizing their warriors. And they're all heading in the same direction. Toward the Shadow Court, Elena finished. Someone's calling in old debts, Derek. This isn't just about one awakened queen anymore. This is about a war that's been brewing for centuries, and we're all going to have to choose a side. Derek stopped pacing and fixed them both with his steely gaze. What do you recommend? Elena and Kane exchanged a look before Elena spoke carefully. Lyra grew up in this pack. She may not remember much about her heritage, but she remembers us. If we reach out to her now, offer our support instead of our enmity, she might be willing to protect the pack that raised her, Kane concluded. Even if some of its members tried to kill her. And if we don't? Derek asked, though he already knew the answer. Then we'll be facing the full power of a Shadow Queen who has every reason to consider us her enemies, Elena said bluntly. And from what the ancient texts say about her bloodline's capabilities, that's not a fight any of us would survive. Derek was quiet for a long moment, weighing options that all seemed to lead to disaster. Finally, he spoke. Send word to the other pack alphas. Not the ones who've already chosen their sides, but the ones still sitting on the fence. Tell them that the Moonridge pack officially recognizes Lyra as the rightful Shadow Queen, and we're offering our allegiance. Kane blinked in surprise. Just like that? Just like that, Derek confirmed. Because the alternative is watching our world burn while we pretend we have any choice in the matter. But even as his betas nodded and prepared to carry out his orders, Derek's enhanced hearing caught the sound of howls in the distance. Not the normal patrol calls his wolves used to communicate, but something else entirely. Something filled with rage and bloodlust and the promise of violence. Elena heard it too, her head snapping toward the window with alarm. Those aren't our wolves. No, Derek agreed grimly, already reaching for the emergency alert button that would summon every fighter in the pack. Those are Marcus's new allies. And it sounds like they've decided not to wait for us to choose a side. The howls grew closer, and with them came a scent that made every wolf in the pack house whimper with instinctive terror, shadowhounds, dozens of them, moving through the forest with deadly purpose. Cain was already shifting into his massive beta form, his brown coat bristling with aggression. How long do we have? Derek listened to the approaching sounds of battle and felt his own wolf surge forward, ready to defend his territory and his people. Not long enough. But as the first explosions of supernatural combat began to echo through the night, a new scent reached them, cedar and storms in ancient magic, carried on winds that shouldn't exist in the mortal realm. She's coming, Elena breathed, her tracker senses more finely tuned than either of the males. The Shadow Queen. She's coming here. Derek's smile was grim and full of teeth. Good. Because it's time this pack learned what happens when you try to murder a royal heir. In the distance, Marcus's voice rose above the chaos, commanding his demonic allies with the authority of someone who had never been the alpha he pretended to be. Bring me their heads, he snarled. Every wolf who dares to claim loyalty to that mongrel queen dies tonight. Leave no survivors. Leave no witnesses. But as the words left his mouth, silver light blazed through the forest, and a voice that carried the authority of ancient magic answered his challenge. Then you should have brought a bigger army, you traitorous fool. Because this queen is done being hunted. Chapter 7. The attack on Moonridge Pack ended before it truly began. Lyra descended from the night sky wreathed in silver fire and shadows that danced like living things around her transformed figure. The shadowhounds that had been terrorizing her former pack took one look at her blazing eyes and tried to flee, but there was nowhere to run from power that could reach across realms. She destroyed half of Marcus's demonic army with a gesture, her new abilities turning the corrupted creatures to ash and starlight. The rest surrendered immediately, cowering before the very queen they had been sent to eliminate. Marcus himself barely escaped, disappearing into a portal torn between dimensions just as Kieran materialized beside Lyra in a swirl of darkness and fey magic. Coward, Kieran snarled, shadows coiling around him like angry serpents. Running instead of facing what he's done. But Lyra was focused on the pack members emerging from their damaged buildings, wolves she had grown up with, served faithfully, trusted completely. Their sense told her everything she needed to know about their intentions, and what she found surprised her. You came to help us, Alpha Derek said, approaching with careful respect. No longer the intimidating authority figure from her memories, but a pack leader who understood he was in the presence of something far more powerful than himself. You're my pack, Lyra replied simply, though her voice now carried harmonics that made the words resonate with supernatural authority. Whatever else has happened between us, that doesn't change. Elena and Cain flanked their alpha, both of them staring at her transformation with wonder and no small amount of fear. We're sorry, Elena said quietly. We should have realized what Marcus was. Should have protected you. You couldn't have known, Lyra assured her, then paused as a wave of exhaustion suddenly crashed over her. The battle had taken more out of her than she'd expected, and something else was wrong. The bond with Kieran felt, strained somehow, as if something was interfering with their connection. Little wolf? His mental voice carried concern as he moved closer to her. What is it? Before she could answer, the world tilted sideways and she collapsed. She was standing in a place that existed between sleeping and waking, where the walls were made of shifting starlight and the floor reflected scenes from 1,000 different timelines. This wasn't the Heart Grove or any physical realm, this was the space where prophecies lived, where the future wrote itself in symbols only the most powerful could interpret. Bridgewalker, a voice whispered from everywhere and nowhere. You have awakened, but awakening is only the beginning. Who are you? Lyra asked, though her voice seemed to come from very far away. We are the oracles of the first magic. The ones who spoke the prophecy that has shaped your bloodline for a millennium. The starlight walls began showing her images, flashes of possible futures that made her stomach clench with dread. She saw Kieran chained in a dungeon carved from living shadow. She saw her pack burning while she was forced to watch. She saw the mortal world consumed by supernatural war while she stood powerless to stop it. These are what will come to pass if you make the wrong choices, the oracle continued. The Shadow Master has spent centuries preparing for your awakening. He knows your weaknesses, your fears, your desires. He will use them all against you. Tell me something I don't know, Lyra said with more confidence than she felt. Very well. The bond you share with the Shadow Prince, it is not as unbreakable as you believe. There exists a ritual, ancient and terrible, that can sever even a true mate connection. The Shadow Master possesses the knowledge to perform it. Terror flooded through her at the thought of losing Kieran, but she forced herself to focus. What does he want? Your power, channeled through willing sacrifice. If you choose destruction over unity, if you use your abilities to tear down rather than build up, you will feed his strength until he becomes unstoppable. And if I choose unity? The images changed, showing her visions of supernatural beings working together, different realms connected by bridges of silver light, peace reigning across all worlds. But even in these hopeful futures, she saw herself standing alone on a mountain of crystal, forever separated from the beings she had united. Unity requires sacrifice, Bridgewalker. To connect all realms, you must belong fully to none. The choice is not just between creation and destruction, it is between love and duty. That's not a choice, she whispered. That's torture. Yes, the oracle agreed with something that might have been sympathy. Which is why so few of your bloodline ever fulfilled the prophecy. Most chose love and let the worlds remain divided. Others chose duty and went mad from isolation. There has to be another way. Perhaps. But the path to finding it will cost you everything you hold dear. Your mate, your pack, your very humanity, all may be forfeit before the end. The prophetic space began to dissolve around her, but the oracle's voice followed her back toward consciousness. Remember, Shadow Queen, the prophecy speaks of choice, but choice can be taken from you. Beware the one who comes wearing a familiar face. Beware the love that demands your power. And beware the sacrifice that seems too easy, for it is surely a trap. Lyra jolted awake to find herself lying on a makeshift bed in what remained of the Moonridge Pack's common room. Kieran sat beside her, his golden eyes dark with worry, while Derek, Elena, and Kane stood nearby with expressions of barely concealed panic. How long was I unconscious? She asked, sitting up carefully. 6 hours, Kieran replied, taking her hand in both of his. You were muttering in a language none of us recognized, and your power was fluctuating wildly. What did you see? She looked around at the expectant faces and made a decision. They needed to know what they were truly facing. The Shadow Master isn't just trying to steal my power, she said quietly. He's trying to corrupt it. Force me to choose destruction over unity so that my abilities will fuel his conquest of all the realms. And the prophecy? Derek asked. What does it really say? Lyra took a shaky breath, feeling the weight of destiny pressing down on her shoulders. That I have to choose between saving the worlds and keeping the people I love. That unity comes at the cost of everything that makes me who I am. Kieran's grip on her hand tightened. There has to be another way. Maybe, she agreed. But finding it is going to require walking into the Shadow Master's trap willingly. And the Oracle warned me about betrayal. Someone close to me is going to try to take my power for themselves. The room fell silent as everyone processed the implications. Finally, Elena spoke up. Then we make sure you're not walking into anything alone, the tracker said firmly. Pack stands together, no matter what. The Shadow Court stands with you as well, Kieran added, his voice carrying the weight of unbreakable vows. Whatever the prophecy demands, whatever sacrifices must be made, we face them together. But even as the others nodded their agreement, Lyra felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. The Oracle's warning echoed in her mind, beware the love that demands your power. She looked at Kieran's beautiful, determined face and felt her heart break a little. Because she was beginning to suspect that the greatest betrayal might come from the person she trusted most. Outside, storm clouds were gathering despite the clear weather forecast, and in the distance, she could hear the sound of armies on the march. The Shadow Master wasn't waiting for her to make her choice. He was coming to make it for her. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a new voice whispered, one that sounded disturbingly like her own thoughts but carried an undertone of malice that made her soul recoil. Why choose unity when you could have everything? Why sacrifice when you could conquer? The power is yours, Shadow Queen. Use it. Chapter 8. The attack came at midnight, when the moon was dark and shadows held dominion over the world. Lyra woke to the sound of Kieran's sharp intake of breath beside her, his face senses detecting threats before her enhanced but still developing abilities could. They had been staying in the Moonridge Pack's rebuilt guest quarters, trying to plan their next move while the supernatural world buzzed with news of her awakening. How many? She whispered, slipping from the bed with fluid grace that still felt foreign to her transformed body. 12. Maybe 15. His golden eyes blazed in the darkness as he moved to the window. Not shadow hounds this time. Something else. Something cleaner. Lyra extended her senses, feeling for the otherworldly signatures approaching through the forest. What she found made her blood run cold. Void assassins, she breathed. The Shadow Master's elite killers. Kieran's expression darkened. I thought they were a myth. So did I. She began pulling on clothes, her movements quick and efficient. But the Oracle's visions showed me things about the enemy's forces that I wish I could unsee. Void assassins are fae who sold their souls to darkness centuries ago. They can phase between dimensions, strike without warning, and their blades are forged from pure nothingness. Wonderful, Kieran muttered, shadows already beginning to coil around his hands. Any weaknesses? Silver light disrupts their phasing abilities, Lyra replied, feeling power build in her chest in response to the approaching danger. And they can't maintain corporeal form in the presence of strong emotional bonds. Their eyes met across the small room, and she felt the mate bond between them flare with sudden intensity. Whatever else the prophecy might demand of them, whatever sacrifices lay ahead, their connection was real and unbreakable. Together? Kieran asked, extending his hand. Always, she replied, taking it. The moment their fingers intertwined, silver fire erupted around them both, not just her power, but their combined abilities creating something entirely new. Through the windows, she could hear the void assassins' hunting cries falter as they encountered energy that shouldn't exist. They weren't expecting us to fight as one, Kieran realized. Good. Let's keep them off balance. They moved as a unit through the guest quarters and out into the forest beyond, following the trail of wrongness that marked their enemy's passage. The Moonridge Pack's warriors had already mobilized, but Lyra could smell their fear on the night air. Void assassins were beyond anything a normal pack could handle. She found the first assassin attempting to phase through Derek's bedroom wall, its form flickering between solid and translucent as it prepared to strike the sleeping alpha. Without hesitation, she unleashed a concentrated beam of silver light that caught the creature mid-phase and tore it apart at the molecular level. Derek woke to the sound of otherworldly screaming and rolled off his bed just as a second assassin materialized where his head had been, its void blade passing through empty air. "Stay down," Lyra commanded, her voice carrying supernatural authority that made the alpha's wolf instinctively obey. But the assassin turned toward her with eyeless sockets that somehow still managed to convey hatred beyond measure. When it spoke, its voice was like the whisper of dying stars. "Shadow Queen. You cannot hide behind your mate's power forever." "Who says I'm hiding?" she replied, stepping forward with confidence she didn't entirely feel. The creature lunged with inhuman speed, its void blade whistling through the air toward her heart. But instead of dodging, Lyra caught the weapon bare-handed, her transformed physiology allowing her to grasp pure nothingness without injury. The assassin's shock was palpable. "Impossible." "I'm full of surprises," she said, then channeled silver fire directly through the blade and into the creature's essence. It dissolved with a shriek that shattered every window in the pack house. Through the mate bond, she felt Kieran's fierce pride and his own ongoing battle with 3 more assassins in the forest beyond. His shadows danced with their void forms in a deadly waltz that left trees withered in their wake. "Need help?" she asked through their mental connection. "I've got them contained," he replied, though she could sense his strain. "But there are more coming. This is just the first wave." She was about to respond when Elena's scream cut through the night. Lyra spun toward the sound and saw the pack's tracker struggling against 2 assassins who had cornered her near the communications building. Kane was down, his massive beta form lying motionless in a pool of what looked like liquid shadow. Rage exploded through Lyra's consciousness, not the cold fury of a supernatural queen, but the protective anger of someone watching her family be threatened. Power erupted from her in waves, washing over the entire pack territory and sending every remaining void assassin stumbling backward. She actually teleported, an ability she hadn't known she possessed, appearing between Elena and her attackers. "You picked the wrong pack to terrorize," she snarled. This time, she didn't hold back. Silver fire poured from her hands in torrents, creating a dome of protective energy around Elena while simultaneously lashing out at their enemies. The assassins tried to phase away from her attacks, but she followed them into the spaces between dimensions, hunting them through realities they thought were safe. When she emerged back into the physical world, both creatures were gone and Elena was staring at her with something approaching awe. "Kane," Elena whispered, dropping to her knees beside her mate. Lyra knelt as well, placing her hands on the unconscious Beta's chest. The void blade had left a wound that was more than physical, it was trying to drain his very essence. But her power was stronger, and she poured healing energy into him until his eyes fluttered open. "What happened?" he groaned. "You almost died saving the communications array," Elena told him, tears streaming down her face. "The assassins were trying to cut off our contact with the outside world." Understanding clicked for Lyra. This wasn't just an assassination attempt. They were trying to isolate us before the real attack begins. Kieran materialized beside them, his clothes torn and his aristocratic features splattered with something that looked like liquid starlight. "The forest is clear," he reported. "But you're right, this was reconnaissance. They learned what they came for." "Which is?" His golden eyes met hers with grim certainty. "That you're strong enough to protect your pack, but not strong enough to be everywhere at once. They're going to force you to choose who to save." Derek approached, his alpha authority restored now that the immediate threat had passed. "How long do we have?" Lyra extended her senses, feeling for the massive wrongness that marked the Shadow Master's approach. What she found made her stomach clench with dread. "Not long," she said quietly. "He's marshalling everything: demons, corrupted fae, rogue vampires, fallen angels. And they're not just coming here. They're moving against every supernatural stronghold simultaneously. Forcing you to spread yourself thin, Kieran realized. Classic military strategy. There's more, Lyra continued, her enhanced perception picking up details that terrified her. He's not just targeting supernatural communities. Human cities are going to be caught in the crossfire, and the mortal governments he's allied with are planning to use the chaos to justify a full-scale genocide against all supernatural beings. The implications hung heavy in the night air. This wasn't just about her choice between unity and destruction anymore. This was about the survival of every non-human creature on Earth. Elena stood slowly, helping Kane to his feet. Then we need allies. Every pack, every coven, every court that's still independent. They won't trust me, Lyra said. I'm an unknown quantity with unprecedented power. Some of them will see me as a bigger threat than the Shadow Master. Then we make them understand, Derek said firmly. Because the alternative is watching everything we've built burn while we argue about politics. But even as they began planning their desperate diplomatic mission, new sounds reached them from the darkness beyond, not the hunting cries of assassins, but something far worse. War horns. Hundreds of them, echoing from every direction as the Shadow Master's army began its final advance. Kieran's hand found hers, their bond flaring with shared determination and love that defied destiny itself. Whatever happens next, he said quietly, remember that this isn't over. Tonight was just to see what you're truly capable of. Lyra squeezed his fingers, drawing strength from his unwavering faith in her. They're afraid of what I'm becoming. Good, he replied with a fierce smile. They should be. But as the war horns grew closer and the sky began to bleed with unnatural aurora that marked the opening of dimensional portals, a new voice whispered in her mind, not the oracle this time, but something far more sinister. They're afraid because they know you could destroy them all with a thought. Why protect those who would chain your power? Why choose unity when you could rule everything? Chapter 9. The neutral grounds existed in a pocket dimension between all realms, accessible only by invitation and protected by magic older than civilization itself. It was here that the surviving leaders of the supernatural world had agreed to meet, drawn together by desperation and the growing realization that their ancient grudges meant nothing in the face of extinction. Lyra stood at the center of the massive obsidian amphitheater, feeling the weight of dozens of gazes upon her transformed figure. Some looked at her with hope, others with suspicion, and more than a few with barely concealed hunger for the power she represented. So, rumbled Matthias Blackthorne, Alpha Prime of the North American Wolf Council, this is the infamous Shadow Queen we've heard so much about. At 7 feet tall with silver-streaked hair and scars that told the story of 1,000 battles, Matthias commanded respect from every wolf-blooded creature in the gathering. But his pale blue eyes held skepticism as he studied her. She's just a child, scoffed Empress Vivian of the Winter Court, her crystalline features beautiful and cold as Arctic ice. Barely awakened to her abilities and already the realms tremble? I find that difficult to believe. Believe what you will, Kieran replied from his position at Lyra's right side, his voice carrying the authority of Shadow royalty. But the Shadow Master's armies are real, and they're moving against all of us. Because of her, accused Master Chin of the Shanghai vampire clan, his ancient eyes glittering with predatory intelligence. If we simply hand over the girl, perhaps this unpleasantness can be resolved without further bloodshed. The temperature in the amphitheater dropped 20 degrees as Lyra's power responded to the implied threat. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that made the very air shimmer with barely contained magic. I didn't ask for this power, she said quietly. I didn't ask to be the center of a war that's been brewing for centuries. But I'm here now, and I'm offering you a choice: stand together against the darkness, or fall separately to an enemy that sees all of us as obstacles to be eliminated. Pretty words, said High Priestess Selene of the Sacred Moon Coven, her silver hair flowing like liquid moonlight around her ageless features. But words won't stop Voidblade assassins or corrupted angels. What can you actually do, young queen? Instead of answering with words, Lyra extended her awareness across all the dimensions that touched this neutral space. Through her enhanced perception, she could see the threads of power that connected every supernatural being present: pack bonds, court allegiances, blood ties, magical contracts. The web of relationships that had kept their world functioning for millennia. And she could see how easily that web could be rewoven. With surgical precision, she began to demonstrate her bridge-walking abilities. Not to dominate or control, but to show what unity could actually mean. She opened temporary connections between the Wolf Alphas and the Fey Nobles, allowing them to share strength. She created communication links between the Vampire Masters and the Witch Covens, enabling perfect coordination. She even forged understanding between ancient enemies, letting them feel each other's perspectives directly. For just a moment, every being in the amphitheater experienced what it would be like if the supernatural world truly worked as one. The silence that followed was deafening. "Impossible," breathed Lady Morgana of the Autumn Court, her amber eyes wide with wonder. "The barriers between our natures, they've existed since the dawn of creation." "Barriers exist to be transcended," Lyra replied, carefully withdrawing her power to let each leader return to their individual awareness. "The question is whether you're willing to let go of old prejudices long enough to survive what's coming." High Lord Dorian of the Summer Court leaned forward in his throne of living gold, his impossibly beautiful features thoughtful. "The bridge magic is real. More powerful than any of our histories suggest. But such abilities come with a price, don't they, young queen?" Lyra felt Kieran's tension spike through their bond, but she answered honestly. "The prophecies speak of sacrifice. To truly unite the realms, I would have to belong fully to none of them. To stand apart from everything I love in order to serve as an eternal bridge between worlds." "And would you?" Alpha Matthias asked bluntly. "Would you sacrifice your mate bond, your pack loyalties, your very humanity to become what the prophecies demand?" The question hung in the air like a physical weight. Through their mental connection, she felt Kieran's love and his terror at what her answer might be. Around the amphitheater, supernatural leaders waited to hear whether she was truly willing to pay the ultimate price for unity. "I would consider it," she said finally, "if I believed it was the only way to save everyone I care about. But I think there might be another path. A way to build bridges without destroying what makes us who we are." "Explain," commanded Empress Vivian, ice crystals forming in the air around her throne. "The Shadow Master's power comes from division," Lyra continued, feeling her way through an idea that was only half-formed. "He feeds on our mistrust, our ancient grudges, our refusal to work together. But what if we didn't just unite temporarily for this war? What if we created permanent bonds between our peoples?" Master Chen's eyebrows rose. "You're talking about fundamental changes to our natures." "I'm talking about evolution," she corrected. "The supernatural world has remained static for millennia because we've been afraid of change. But change is coming whether we embrace it or not. The question is whether we shape it ourselves or let our enemies shape it for us." "And if this grand experiment fails?" asked High Priestess Selene. "If your bridge magic proves insufficient to overcome centuries of biological and magical incompatibility?" Lyra met her gaze steadily. "Then I'll consider the traditional sacrifice the prophecies demand. But I won't destroy myself and my relationships without first trying to find a better way." Around the amphitheater, she could feel the tide of opinion shifting. Not to blind acceptance, these were leaders who had survived millennia of political intrigue, but to cautious hope. "The girl speaks sense," rumbled a new voice. Ancient beyond measure, carrying power that made even the assembled royalty straighten with respect. Perhaps it is time the council heard a more direct perspective on these matters. The speaker materialized from shadows that seemed to exist independently of any light source, a figure draped in robes that showed glimpses of star-filled void, with eyes that held the weight of eons. This was one of the Primarchs, the first beings to emerge from the cosmic chaos that preceded creation. "Honored Ancient," Empress Vivian said, inclining her head respectfully. "We did not know you were observing." "We observe all things that threaten the cosmic balance," the Primarch replied. "And this conflict threatens more than just your individual realms. The Shadow Master's victory would create a cascade failure across all dimensions." "Then you support the girl's proposal?" Alpha Matthias asked. "We support any solution that preserves the integrity of the cosmic order," the Ancient answered. "But know this, the bridge magic she proposes to wield comes with costs beyond what any of you understand. To create permanent bonds between incompatible natures requires channeling forces that were locked away for good reason." Lyra felt ice form in her veins. "What kind of forces?" "The primal chaos from which all things emerged," the Primarch said quietly. "The raw creative power that shaped reality itself. Such forces can build or destroy with equal ease, and they respond to the wielder's deepest desires rather than their conscious will." The implications were staggering. If her unconscious mind decided that destruction was easier than unity. However, the Ancient continued, "We have observed your growth, young Bridgewalker. Your heart remains pure despite the corruptions whispered in your mind. If any being can channel such power safely, it may be you." "Maybe" isn't exactly reassuring, Kieran muttered. "Nothing about this path is guaranteed," the Primarch agreed. "But the alternative, watching all realms burn while supernatural beings cling to outdated divisions, is certain failure." High Lord Dorian stood from his golden throne, his decision clear in his bearing. "The Summer Court stands with the Shadow Queen." One by one, the other leaders rose as well, each pledging their support despite the risks involved. Even Master Chen, after a long moment of consideration, nodded his agreement. "The Shanghai clan will honor the ancient treaties," he said formally. "We stand with the Bridgewalker." But as the formal declarations of alliance echoed through the amphitheater, Lyra felt a chill that had nothing to do with Empress Vivian's ice magic. Through her enhanced senses, she detected something wrong, a presence that didn't belong, watching from the shadows beyond the neutral ground's protections. "The Shadow Master knows about this meeting," she realized with growing horror. "He's been listening to everything." Before she could voice her concerns, reality tore open like wet paper and massive forms began pouring through, not the corrupted creatures they'd been fighting, but something far worse. Pure demons from the deepest hells, beings of such malevolent power that their very presence began corrupting the neutral ground's ancient protections. "Impossible," gasped High Priestess Selene. "The wards should prevent any hostile entry." "The wards were designed to keep out supernatural beings," the Primarch said grimly, shadows beginning to coil around their ancient form. "These creatures exist outside the natural order entirely." Chaos erupted as every leader in the amphitheater shifted into battle mode, their various powers clashing against demonic energies that defied all known laws of magic. But even working together, they were being overwhelmed. Through the din of supernatural combat, Lyra heard a familiar voice, Marcus, speaking with authority that proved he was far more than just a corrupted alpha. "Surrender the girl," he commanded from the center of the demonic army, "and the rest of you may live to serve new masters." But it was the figure standing beside him that made Lyra's heart stop. Tall, beautiful, with golden eyes that she had trusted completely, Kieran, or something wearing his face, smiling with cruel satisfaction. "Beware the love that demands your power," the oracle's warning echoed in her mind. Beside her, the real Kieran sensed her shock and spun to face his doppelganger. "Shapeshifter," he snarled. "How dare you wear my form?" The false Kieran laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "How do you know which of us is real, little wolf? After all, haven't you been wondering why your precious mate bond has felt strained lately?" Through her connection to the real Kieran, Lyra felt his love and fury blazing like a star. But she also felt something else, doubt, carefully planted and nurtured over weeks of subtle manipulation. The war for her soul had begun in earnest, and her enemies were using her own heart as their weapon. Choose carefully, Shadow Queen, the false Kieran continued, extending his hand with perfect mimicry of her mate's mannerisms. Because one of us has been lying to you from the very beginning. Chapter 10. The mate bond sang with truth, cutting through illusion like silver fire through shadow. Lyra closed her eyes and reached deep into the connection that had saved her life, transformed her nature, and become the anchor of her very soul. Through it, she felt Kieran's essence, complex, passionate, fiercely protective, and utterly devoted to her well-being. The love that flowed between them was so pure it made her chest ache with its intensity. When she opened her eyes and looked at the false Kieran, she saw only empty mimicry wearing her mate's face. "Nice try," she said quietly, power beginning to build around her like a gathering storm. "But you forgot one crucial detail." The shapeshifter's perfect features twisted with confusion. "What detail?" "My Kieran would never ask me to choose between him and my duty," she replied, then unleashed a concentrated blast of silver fire that tore through the creature's illusion and revealed its true form, a writhing mass of shadow and malice that screamed as it dissolved. The real Kieran appeared at her side instantly, shadows coiling around him like protective armor. "How did you know?" he asked, though his pride in her blazed through their bond. "Because you've never once demanded that I prove my love," she said, taking his hand. "You've only asked me to trust it." But their moment of triumph was short-lived. The demonic army surrounding them had grown larger, and Marcus was no longer bothering to hide his true nature. Dark energy poured off him in waves as his human disguise melted away to reveal something ancient and terrible. "Touching," he sneered, his voice now carrying the resonance of the abyss itself. "But sentiment won't save you from what comes next." The Primarch moved between them and the demon horde, ancient power manifesting as barriers of crystallized starlight. "The trials begin now, Bridgewalker. 3 tests to prove your worthiness to wield the primal forces of creation." "What trials?" Lyra demanded, but reality was already shifting around them. The amphitheater dissolved, replaced by a vast crystalline chamber that existed outside normal space and time. The supernatural leaders were still present, but frozen in moments between heartbeats, their battle with the demons suspended until the trials were complete. "The trial of power," the Primarch announced, their voice echoing from everywhere at once. "Can you command the forces of creation without being consumed by them?" The chamber filled with raw chaos energy, the primal stuff from which all realities were born. It pressed against Lyra's consciousness like molten metal, eager to be shaped but dangerous beyond measure. One wrong thought, one moment of lost control, and it would remake everything according to her deepest subconscious desires. "I want to save everyone," she thought desperately, trying to focus her intentions. "I want to protect my mate, my pack, all the innocent beings caught in this war." But underneath those noble goals, she felt something darker stirring, the part of her that was tired of being hunted, tired of having to prove herself, tired of watching others suffer for her existence. The part that whispered it would be so much easier to simply eliminate all threats permanently. The chaos energy responded to both intentions simultaneously, creating 2 possible futures in the space around her. In one, she saw herself building bridges between worlds, healing ancient wounds, creating an era of unprecedented peace and cooperation. In the other, she watched herself become a conqueror whose very presence made supernatural beings kneel in terror. "Choose," the chaos whispered in her mind. "Unity or dominion? Sacrifice or supremacy?" Through the mate bond, she felt Kieran's unwavering love and faith in her goodness. Even frozen in time, his essence reached out to anchor her in who she truly was rather than what she might become. "I choose unity," she said aloud, focusing all her will on the positive future. "I choose to build rather than destroy." The chaos energy fought her decision, drawn to the darker path by its very nature. But her love for Kieran, her loyalty to her pack, her genuine desire to protect innocence, all of it combined to tip the balance toward light. The destructive future dissolved, leaving only possibilities of healing and growth. The crystalline chamber shifted, and suddenly she stood in a vast library where every book contained the memories and experiences of every supernatural being who had ever lived. The trial of mind, the pre-march continued. Can you bear the weight of universal knowledge without losing yourself in the vastness of it? Before Lyra could protest, the books began opening themselves, pouring millennia of accumulated wisdom, trauma, joy, and pain directly into her consciousness. She experienced the loneliness of the first vampire, the wild freedom of the earliest werewolves, the terrible beauty of fey courts in their golden age. She felt the weight of every alpha's responsibility, every witch's connection to primal magic, every demon's fall from grace. It was too much. Far too much for any single mind to contain. She felt her sense of self beginning to fragment under the pressure of countless other identities, their memories threatening to overwrite her own. Who am I? She thought desperately as personalities from across history tried to claim her consciousness. Lyra? The Shadow Queen? All of them? None of them? But then, cutting through the chaos of universal memory, came a single voice, her mother's, speaking words she had long forgotten. You are my daughter, little star. Whatever else you become, whatever power you wield, remember that love is what makes you who you are. Not magic, not destiny, not the expectations of others. Love. Lyra grasped that memory like a lifeline, using it to rebuild her sense of self from the foundation up. She was Lyra Shadowmere, daughter of Anna Shadowmere, mate to Kieran of the Shadow Court, member of the Moonridge Pack. She was someone who chose to protect rather than conquer, to heal rather than harm, to sacrifice for others rather than demand sacrifice from them. The overwhelming flood of memories settled into background knowledge she could access without being consumed by it. She had passed the second trial. The library transformed into a simple room with two chairs facing each other. In one sat Kieran, not the real Kieran, but a perfect replica created by the trial itself. The trial of bond, the Primarch said, their voice softer now, almost sympathetic. The hardest test of all. Can you love without possessing? Can you let go when letting go is the greater act of love? The trial Kieran looked at her with eyes full of pain and understanding. The prophecies are clear, my queen. To save all the realms, you must stand apart from them. Including me. No, she whispered, even as she felt the truth of it resonating in her soul. There has to be another way. Perhaps, the trial Kieran agreed. But not one that guarantees our happiness. If you choose the traditional path, the one that ensures unity, you'll become something beyond mortal comprehension. A living bridge between worlds, but no longer able to form the close personal bonds that make life worth living. And if I refuse? Then you remain yourself, but the realms stay divided. Vulnerable to future attacks, unable to truly cooperate, always on the edge of war. His expression was infinitely sad. You save our love by dooming countless others to suffering you could have prevented. The choice hung between them like a sword. Love or duty. Personal happiness or universal salvation. Through their real bond, she felt the true Kieran's anguish as he experienced the trial alongside her. He would never ask her to choose him over her purpose, but losing her would destroy him as surely as losing him would destroy her. What would you do? She asked the trial Kieran. His smile was heartbreaking. I would love you enough to let you make the choice that lets you live with yourself afterward. And I would trust that our bond is strong enough to transcend whatever form it has to take. Understanding dawned like sunrise after the longest night. The trials weren't testing her power, her knowledge, or even her love. They were testing her wisdom, her ability to see beyond the false choices presented by fear and find the paths that others had missed. "I reject the premise," she said firmly. "You're asking me to choose between love and duty as if they're mutually exclusive. But love is my duty. My bond with Kieran doesn't make me weaker, it makes me stronger. It doesn't divide my loyalties, it clarifies them." The trial Kieran began to smile, and she pressed on. "The prophecies speak of sacrifice, but they don't specify what must be sacrificed. Maybe what needs to die isn't my relationships, but my fear of being vulnerable. Maybe what needs to be transcended isn't my bonds to others, but my belief that I have to carry everything alone." The crystalline chamber began to resonate with harmonic frequencies that spoke of profound truth being recognized. The Primarch's ancient presence settled around her like a blessing. "You have passed all 3 trials, Bridgewalker," they said with something that might have been approval. "Not by choosing the expected paths, but by finding new ones entirely." Reality snapped back to the amphitheater, where the frozen battle resumed exactly where it had left off. But now Lyra carried something new, the wisdom to use her power without being consumed by it, the knowledge to understand without losing herself, and the certainty that love was not weakness but the greatest strength of all. The demons attacking the supernatural leaders suddenly found themselves facing something they had never encountered before, a shadow queen who fought not from anger or fear, but from love so pure it blazed like a star. Marcus's corrupted form recoiled as silver fire washed over his demonic army, not destroying them but offering them something unprecedented, the chance to choose redemption over destruction. Some took it. Others fled. A few stood their ground and were gently, mercifully erased from existence. When the battle ended, the amphitheater was silent except for the sound of supernatural leaders trying to process what they had just witnessed. "The bond is completed," the Primarch announced. "The trials are ended. The Bridgewalker has proven herself worthy to wield the primal forces." But even as the assembled royalty knelt in acknowledgement of her proven power, Lyra felt something shift in the cosmic order itself. The trials had changed her, made her something new. She was still herself, still loved Kieran with every fiber of her being, still felt loyalty to her pack. But now she was also something more. Something that could reach across realms and rewrite the very laws that kept supernatural beings apart. War was coming, and now the world would see her as she truly was, not just a shadow queen, but the Bridgewalker prophesied to reshape reality itself. The question was whether that would be enough to save everyone she loved. Chapter 11. 3 days after the trials, Derek Moonridge stood in the ruins of what had once been the Crescent Valley Pact territory, staring at devastation that defied comprehension. The Shadowmaster's army had swept through here like a plague, leaving behind nothing but crystallized ground where a thriving community had existed for over 2 centuries. No bodies, no survivors, no trace that anyone had ever lived here except for the pack markers that had been deliberately left standing, a message for any who might find this place. Submit or be erased. How many? Lyra's voice came from behind him, soft with grief and barely contained fury. Derek didn't turn around. He'd felt her approach through the supernatural awareness that all alphas possessed, had sensed the incredible power she now carried like a second heartbeat. But seeing the destruction of an entire pack, 400 wolves, including cubs barely old enough to shift, had drained him of the usual territorial responses to outside dominance. "All of them," he said quietly. Alpha Morrison tried to remain neutral. Said his pack wouldn't choose sides in a war between supernatural royalty. And the Shadow Master saw that as defiance. Worse. He saw it as an opportunity to send a message. Derek finally turned to face her, noting how much she changed since the trials. The raw power was still there, but now it was tempered with something that looked like ancient wisdom. "There are 12 more territories that have gone silent in the past 72 hours. All packs that refuse to pledge allegiance to either side." Lyra closed her eyes, extending her enhanced senses across the surrounding area. When she opened them again, her expression was grim. They're not all dead. Some were taken. I can feel their terror from here. Taken where? Conversion camps, Kieran said, materializing from the shadows with Elena and Cain flanking him. The Fey Prince's golden eyes blazed with cold fury. We've located 3 of them so far. The Shadow Master is using ancient corruption rituals to turn captured supernaturals into his servants. Elena stepped forward, her tracker senses still processing the residual sense of violence. It's not just forced loyalty. He's actually changing their fundamental natures. Wolves into shadowhounds, witches into voidcasters, vampires into something that feeds on hope instead of blood. Derek felt his alpha instincts roar to life at the thought of his people being subjected to such violation. Can the process be reversed? We don't know, Lyra admitted. But I'm going to try. Starting with the Moonridge Pack members who were taken. The Alpha's head snapped up in shock. What are you talking about? All my people are accounted for. Cain exchanged a look with Elena before speaking carefully. That's what we thought too. But when we did a thorough headcount after the Void Assassin attack, we found discrepancies. 3 pack members are missing, taken during the confusion. Who? Derek's voice carried the deadly authority of an alpha protecting his own. Sarah Chin from the communications team, Elena reported. Marcus Thompson from Border Patrol. And... She hesitated, pain flickering across her features. Beth Summers. Lyra's former roommate. The news hit Derek like a physical blow. Beth had been one of their most promising young wolves, barely 22 and already showing signs of beta-level leadership potential. More importantly, she'd been Lyra's closest friend before the awakening changed everything. He watched Lyra's face carefully, seeing grief and guilt war with determination in her transformed features. The old Lyra would have blamed herself, would have offered to trade herself for her friend's safety. This new version, the Bridgewalker who had passed trials that tested the very foundations of her character, had steel in her spine that promised a different kind of response. Where are the camps? She asked quietly. Scattered across dimensional boundaries, Kieran replied. The closest one is anchored about 30 miles from here, existing in a pocket realm that overlaps with our reality. Heavily guarded? Beyond heavily. But that's not the real problem. The Fey Prince's expression darkened. The corruption process requires the victims to participate willingly. On some level, they have to choose to abandon their old loyalties and embrace what the Shadow Master offers. Derek felt ice form in his veins. And what does he offer? Power, Elena said softly. Freedom from pack bonds, court allegiances, coven hierarchies. He promises them the ability to transcend their natures and become something greater. It's seductive, Cain added grimly. Especially to wolves who've always felt constrained by pack structure, or Fey who've chafed under court politics. He's not just corrupting them, he's giving them what they think they've always wanted. The implications were staggering. If the Shadow Master could turn their own people against them willingly, then every rescue attempt was also a recruitment opportunity for their enemy. There's something else, Lyra said, her enhanced perceptions picking up details the others had missed. The corruption isn't permanent if it's caught early enough. The longer someone remains in his service, the deeper the changes become. But in the first few weeks, we might be able to save them, Derek finished, hope and fear warring in his chest. We can try. But it means going into enemy territory, facing an unknown number of corrupted supernaturals, and somehow convincing our own people that the power they've been offered is a trap. Derek looked around at the crystallized wasteland that had once been a thriving pack territory, then back at the small group of allies who represented their only hope of preventing more such devastation. What do you need from me? He asked simply. Lyra's expression softened slightly. I need you to let me go. The words hit him with unexpected force. In all the chaos of the past weeks, he'd never fully processed what Lyra's transformation meant for her place in his pack. She was still technically a member of Moonridge, still carried their scent markers and territorial bonds. But she was also a supernatural queen whose power transcended any single pack's authority. "You were never really mine to hold," he said quietly. "I see that now. You belonged to something greater from the beginning." "That's not what I mean." She stepped closer, and he felt the full weight of her transformed presence, not threatening, but vast in a way that made his alpha wolf want to bare its throat in respect. "I need you to formally release me from pack bonds. Not because I don't care about all of you, but because what I'm about to do will put you in danger if I'm still officially your responsibility." Understanding dawned with the force of revelation. As long as she remained pack, anything she did would reflect on Moonridge. Her actions could trigger retribution against every wolf under Derek's protection. "The formal severance ritual," he breathed. "You want to make sure that whatever consequences come from your choices fall on you alone. I'm asking you to let me walk away from the protection of pack bonds so that I can protect the pack itself," she confirmed. It was both the most selfless and most terrifying thing any pack member had ever asked of him. To formally release her would leave her without the fundamental social structure that defined werewolf existence. She would be packless, a state that drove most wolves insane within months. But she was no longer just a wolf, was she? Derek looked at Kieran, seeing the Fae Prince's understanding and support blazing in his golden eyes. Then at Elena and Kane, both of whom nodded their agreement despite the pain the decision caused them. "The pack will always consider you family," Derek said formally, drawing on rituals that were older than recorded history. "But if severance is what you need to protect that family, then I release you from all bonds of hierarchy, territory, and obligation." The words carried power that resonated through dimensions, officially cutting the ties that had connected Lyra to Moonridge Pack since childhood. But instead of the isolation Derek had expected to feel from her, something else flowed between them: respect, affection, and a connection based on choice rather than magical compulsion. "Thank you," she said simply. "Now what?" Kane asked. Lyra turned toward the dimensional anchor point where the first conversion camp existed, her transformed senses already mapping the enemy's defenses. "Now we go save our people," she said quietly. "And we show the Shadow Master what happens when he tries to corrupt the ones I love." But as they prepared to depart for what might be a suicide mission, Derek couldn't shake the feeling that this was exactly what their enemy had been hoping for. The Shadow Master had taken their people not just to corrupt them, but to lure Lyra into a trap that would test more than her power. It would test whether the Bridgewalker could save her friends without becoming the very thing she sought to destroy. In the distance, storm clouds were gathering despite the clear sky, and Derek could swear he heard the sound of laughter carried on winds that smelled of sulfur and despair. The past stayed behind them as they walked toward an uncertain future, but new enemies were already stirring in the shadows ahead. Chapter 12. The conversion camp existed in a wound between realities, a pocket dimension that pulsed with corrupted energy and reeked of despair. Lyra crouched behind a ridge of crystallized pain, literal suffering that had been given physical form, and surveyed the enemy's stronghold through her enhanced senses. What she saw made her stomach clench with rage. Beth stood in the center of a ritual circle carved from obsidian and bone, her familiar features twisted with an expression Lyra had never seen before, cold ambition mixed with predatory hunger. Dark energy swirled around her transformed friend, and when she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that spoke of fundamental change. "I understand now," Beth was saying to a figure shrouded in shadows. "All those years serving the pack, being grateful for scraps of attention, never questioning why some wolves got to lead while others followed. I was a fool." "You were limited by the constraints others placed upon you," the shadow figure replied in a voice like grinding stone. "But those constraints no longer apply. Show me what you've learned." Beth extended her hand toward a group of captured wolves from the Crescent Valley pack, and darkness poured from her fingertips. Where it touched them, their expressions began to change, fear giving way to calculating interest, loyalty dissolving into selfish desire. "She's spreading the corruption voluntarily," Kieran whispered from beside Lyra, his golden eyes blazing with fury. "They haven't just changed her nature, they've convinced her that this is what she wanted all along." "It gets worse," Elena breathed from their other side, her tracker senses analyzing the camp's layout. "I count 47 converted supernaturals down there, and they're all working together. Wolves, vampires, fae, witches, species that should be natural enemies cooperating like they share the same goals." "Because they do now," Kane said grimly. "Whatever the Shadow Master's corruption process does, it replaces their original loyalties with absolute devotion to his cause." Lyra extended her enhanced awareness deeper into the camp, trying to understand the mechanics of what she was seeing. What she found chilled her to the bone. "It's not mind control," she realized with growing horror. "It's worse than that. He's not forcing them to serve him, he's convincing them that serving him is the logical choice. He's rewriting their fundamental values and desires." Through the mate bond, she felt Kieran's understanding and shared revulsion. The Shadow Master wasn't creating slaves, he was creating true believers who genuinely thought that everything they cared about before was worthless. "Can it be reversed?" Derek asked from behind them. The Alpha had insisted on coming despite the dangers, driven by the need to see what had become of his missing pack members. "I don't know," Lyra admitted. "To undo this kind of change, I'd have to reach the part of them that still remembers who they used to be. But I'm not sure that part still exists." Before anyone could respond, Beth's head snapped up with predatory awareness. Her eyes, no longer the warm brown Lyra remembered, but cold silver that reflected no light, fixed on their hiding spot with unerring accuracy. "We have visitors," she announced to the camp at large. "The self-proclaimed Shadow Queen has come to play hero." 47 pairs of corrupted eyes turned toward the ridge where they crouched, and Lyra felt the weight of their collective malice like a physical force. "So much for stealth," Kieran muttered, shadows already beginning to coil around him in preparation for battle. "We didn't come here to hide," Lyra said, rising to her full height and letting her power blaze visible around her like silver fire. "We came here to offer them a choice." She stepped into full view of the camp, feeling Elena, Kane, Derek, and Kieran form a protective formation around her. The corrupted supernaturals below began moving toward them with fluid coordination that spoke of shared purpose, but she raised her voice before they could attack. "Beth," she called out, putting all the warmth and affection of their friendship into her tone. "I know you're still in there somewhere. Remember who you used to be. Remember why we were friends." Beth's silver eyes flickered for just a moment, and Lyra felt a surge of hope. But then the shadow figure stepped fully into view, and she found herself face to face with a nightmare. It was Marcus, but transformed beyond recognition. His human form had been replaced by something that looked carved from living darkness, with eyes like burning coals and claws that seemed to cut reality itself. Power rolled off him in waves that made the very air scream. "She remembers," he said with cruel amusement. "She remembers being weak, subservient, grateful for whatever scraps of attention you threw her way. She remembers watching you receive special treatment while she cleaned up after everyone else. And she's grateful to be free of those pathetic emotions." "You're lying," Lyra said, but doubt crept into her voice. "Am I?" Marcus gestured to Beth, who stepped forward with predatory grace. "Tell your former friend what you really thought of her, my dear." Beth's smile was sharp and cold. "I thought you were sanctimonious. Always so sure of your own goodness, always willing to sacrifice yourself for others like it made you special. You never questioned whether the people you were helping actually deserved it." The words hit like physical blows, not because they weren't true, but because they contained enough truth to hurt. "I helped people because it was right," Lyra replied steadily. "Not because they deserved it, but because everyone deserves compassion." "Even him?" Beth gestured toward Marcus. Even the wolves who rejected you? Even the alpha who cast you out? You'd save them all, wouldn't you? Even if they'd rather see you dead. Yes, Lyra said without hesitation. I would. Then you're a fool. Beth's expression held no trace of the warm, caring person Lyra had once known. And your foolishness has led you into a trap. The corrupted supernaturals began closing in from all sides, moving with perfect coordination. But it wasn't their numbers that worried Lyra, it was the realization that they were right about one thing. She would try to save them, even knowing they didn't want to be saved. Even knowing it might destroy her. This wasn't random, Kieran said quietly, his tactical mind analyzing their situation. They took specific people. Ones they knew you'd come for. Of course they did, Marcus laughed. The great Bridgewalker's weakness has always been her refusal to let anyone fall into darkness. Even when saving them puts everyone else at risk. Understanding crashed over Lyra like a wave. This entire scenario was designed to force her into making the choice the Oracle had warned her about, between love and duty, between saving individuals and protecting the greater good. If I try to help them, I'll be vulnerable to corruption myself, she realized aloud. If I don't, I'll have to watch my friends become monsters. And if you try to destroy us to prevent the spread of corruption, Beth added with malicious satisfaction, you'll become exactly what the prophecies warned about, a Bridgewalker who chooses destruction over unity. The trap was perfect in its cruel simplicity. Every choice led to disaster. But as the corrupted circle tightened around them, Lyra felt something new stirring in her chest, not the desperate need to save everyone that had driven her since childhood, but a different kind of wisdom. You're assuming I have to choose, she said quietly, power beginning to build around her in ways that made reality itself tremble. But what if there's a fourth option you didn't consider? Marcus's burning eyes narrowed. What option? Lyra smiled, and for the first time since her awakening, she let the full scope of her Bridgewalker abilities show. Silver fire erupted around her, but not the destructive force they'd expected. Instead, it reached out with surgical precision toward each corrupted supernatural, seeking not to harm them but to touch the deepest parts of their consciousness. The option where I refuse to accept that anyone is beyond redemption, she said. And I prove it. What happened next would either save them all or damn her to the very corruption she sought to heal. But as she reached across dimensions to touch the original souls of 47 lost beings, she heard the Oracle's final warning echoing in her mind. This isn't random, they know what you are now, and they're afraid. The Shadow Master's forces weren't just trying to corrupt her friends. They were trying to corrupt the very concept of hope itself, using her own compassion as the weapon that would bring about her fall. But hope, Lyra was about to discover, was far more powerful than fear had ever imagined. Chapter 13. The moment Lyra's power touched the corrupted souls, reality exploded. She found herself standing in a space between dimensions where the fundamental forces of creation swirled like living things. But she wasn't alone, 47 other consciousness flickered around her like dying stars, each one carrying the echo of who they used to be before the Shadow Master's corruption took hold. Beth, she called out across the dimensional void, reaching for the familiar warmth of her friend's original soul. I know you're still here. Why? The response came back twisted with pain and confusion. Why won't you just let me be free? I don't want to be weak anymore. I don't want to serve others who see me as expendable. You were never expendable to me, Lyra replied, pouring every memory of their friendship into the connection. Remember movie nights in our dorm room? Remember staying up all night when I had nightmares about Marcus? Remember telling me I was worth more than how others treated me? For a moment, Beth's corrupted soul flickered with recognition. But then another voice cut through the dimensional space, ancient, malevolent, and filled with power that dwarfed even Lyra's transformed abilities. Touching, the Shadow Master spoke directly into their shared consciousness. But futile. You think you can undo what I have perfected over millennia? You think your childish notions of friendship can overcome the fundamental truth of existence? The space around them began to shift, showing Lyra visions that made her soul recoil in horror. She saw the Shadow Master's true form, not the corrupted Fey Lord she'd expected, but something far worse. He was one of the Primarchs, one of the original beings who had helped create the cosmic order itself. Surprised, he continued with cruel amusement. Yes, little Bridgewalker. I am Malachar the Fallen, first among the Primarchs, architect of the natural order that you seek to disrupt with your naive dreams of unity. Understanding crashed over her like a physical blow. The Shadow Master wasn't just another enemy seeking power, he was one of the fundamental forces of reality, convinced that the cosmic order required separation and conflict to function properly. The divisions between supernatural races aren't accidents, Malachar continued, his presence pressing against her consciousness like a crushing weight. They are necessary. Without conflict, without struggle, without the pressure of opposing forces, all things stagnate and die. Your bridge magic doesn't create unity, it creates stagnation. Around them, the corrupted souls began to resonate with his words, their original personalities fragmenting further under the weight of cosmic authority. He's lying, Lyra said desperately, but doubt crept into her voice. What if he was right? What if her attempts to unite the supernatural worlds would actually destroy them? Am I? Malachar's laugh echoed across dimensions. Then explain this. The space around them shifted again, showing her visions of possible futures where her bridge magic succeeded. She saw supernatural beings living in perfect harmony, all conflict resolved, all differences bridged. But she also saw stagnation, no growth, no change, no evolution. Just endless, peaceful sameness that slowly drained the vitality from all existence. Conflict drives evolution, the fallen Primarch explained. Struggle creates strength. Without enemies to fight, heroes become unnecessary. Without challenges to overcome, growth becomes impossible. Your unity would create a paradise that is actually a prison. Beth's corrupted soul pulsed with agreement. He's right, Lyra. Look at what I've become, stronger, more confident, free from the constraints that held me back. This isn't corruption. This is evolution. But even as despair threatened to overwhelm her, Lyra felt something else stirring in the dimensional space, a presence so ancient and powerful that even Malachar's cosmic authority seemed diminished by comparison. Nephew, a new voice spoke, carrying harmonics that made reality itself sing in recognition. Still spreading the same tired lies, I see. The space around them brightened as another Primarch manifested, this one radiating warmth and creative energy that stood in stark contrast to Malachar's corrupted darkness. Etheron, Malachar snarled. I should have known you'd interfere. As I should have known you'd try to prevent the very evolution you claim to champion, Etheron replied calmly. Tell me, brother, when did preserving the status quo become more important to you than allowing creation to grow? Lyra felt caught between cosmic forces beyond her comprehension, but Etheron's presence gave her strength to find her voice. What is he talking about? She asked. Your bloodline, Etheron explained, his attention focusing on her with gentle intensity. You are not just descended from the Shadow Queens, child. You carry the essence of the first Bridgewalker, the original being created to connect all realms of existence. New memories flooded through her consciousness, not her own, but inherited from ancestors so ancient their names had been forgotten by history itself. She saw the birth of the supernatural worlds, the first tentative connections between realms, and the being who had made it all possible. The first walker was my creation, Etheron continued. Designed to prove that unity and diversity could coexist. That beings could be connected without losing their individual natures. That growth could come through cooperation rather than conflict. And look how well that worked, Malachar sneered. Your precious first walker nearly destroyed everything with their naive attempts at forced harmony. The first walker was murdered before their work could be completed, Etheron corrected. By your agents. Just as you've been hunting their descendants ever since, preventing them from fulfilling their purpose. The truth hit Lyra like a revelation that rewrote everything she thought she knew about herself and her destiny. You're not just the last Shadow Queen, Etheron said gently. You are the reborn essence of the first walker, carrying not just their power but their purpose. You are here to complete what was begun at the dawn of creation itself. And what happens if I succeed? She asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Evolution, Etheron replied. Not the stagnation Malachar fears, but true growth. The supernatural realms will unite not by losing their differences, but by celebrating them. Conflict will become cooperation. Division will become diversity within unity. Impossible, Malachar raged. The natural order will evolve, Lyra interrupted, understanding flooding through her as her full heritage awakened. Just as it was always meant to. She reached out across the dimensional space, no longer trying to force the corrupted souls back to their original states, but offering them something new, the chance to become more than they had ever been while still retaining the core of who they were. Choose, she said to each of them, including Beth. Not between weakness and strength, not between service and rebellion, but between isolation and connection. You can keep the power you've gained while remembering the love you've lost. The corrupted souls flickered with possibility, caught between Malachar's promises of strength through separation and her offer of strength through unity. This is your true test, Etheron whispered to her. Not whether you can force them to choose, but whether you can show them that choice itself has more options than they've been told. The dimensional space began to tremble as cosmic forces beyond imagination prepared to clash, and Lyra realized that what happened in the next few moments would determine not just the fate of 47 corrupted souls, but the future of every supernatural being in existence. You are the key to uniting the realms or destroying them, she remembered the oracle saying. Now she understood what that really meant. She wasn't just choosing between unity and destruction, she was choosing between two different definitions of what unity could be. And the fate of creation itself hung in the balance. Chapter 14. The dimensional space shattered like glass, hurling Lyra back into physical reality with enough force to crater the ground beneath her feet. Around her, the conversion camp erupted into chaos as 47 corrupted souls suddenly found themselves caught between two cosmic visions of what they could become. Some chose Malachar's path, embracing the power that came from separation and conflict. Others reached for Lyra's offer of unity through diversity. But most flickered between the two options, paralyzed by the magnitude of the choice. Beth stood at the center of it all, her silver eyes now blazing with internal conflict as memories of their friendship warred with the corruption that had remade her fundamental nature. I can't, she whispered, her voice breaking with anguish. I can't go back to being weak. I can't go back to serving others who see me as expendable. You don't have to, Lyra said gently, stepping toward her transformed friend despite the danger. That's not what I'm offering. I'm offering you the chance to be strong and connected. Powerful and loved. You can keep the confidence you've gained while remembering the compassion you've lost. But before Beth could respond, the air around them began to tear as Malachar forced his way back into the physical realm. His presence was so fundamentally wrong that reality itself screamed in protest, and every supernatural in the camp dropped to their knees in instinctive submission. All except Lyra and Kieran. The Fey Prince materialized beside her in a swirl of shadows, his golden eyes blazing with protective fury. Whatever happens, he said quietly, taking her hand, we face it together. Their bond flared with sudden intensity, and Lyra felt something new flowing between them, not just love and mutual support, but an actual sharing of power that made both of them stronger than they could ever be alone. Touching, Malachar sneered as his corrupted form fully manifested. The bridge walker and her pet Fae, believing that affection can overcome cosmic law. "It's not affection," Kieran replied with quiet certainty. "It's partnership. Something you've never understood." The fallen Primarch's expression twisted with ancient rage. Partnership is a lie told by the weak to make themselves feel better about their limitations. True power stands alone. "Then you've already lost," Lyra said, feeling the truth of it resonate through every fiber of her being. Because true power isn't about standing alone, it's about lifting others up with you. She reached out through her enhanced awareness, not trying to force the corrupted souls to choose, but offering them something that Malakar's philosophy couldn't provide, the actual experience of connection without loss of self. Through the mate bond with Kieran, she showed them what it felt like to be stronger together while still remaining individuals. Through her pack connections, she demonstrated loyalty that enhanced rather than constrained. Through her awakening understanding of her cosmic heritage, she revealed possibilities they'd never imagined. One by one, the corrupted supernaturals began to choose. Some, like the twisted shadow hounds that had once been noble wolves, reached for her offer of redemption. Others, too far gone in Malakar's corruption, fled deeper into darkness. But enough chose the path of unity through diversity that the balance began to shift. Beth was the last to decide. "I remember," she said slowly, her silver eyes beginning to show flecks of their original brown. "I remember why we were friends. Not because you were perfect, but because you saw me as worth saving even when I couldn't see it myself." "You are worth saving," Lyra replied, tears streaming down her face. "Not because of what you can do for others, but because of who you are." "Even now? Even after everything I've done?" "Especially now." Beth's corrupted form began to shift, the darkness receding to reveal the person she'd always been underneath, but changed, evolved, carrying new strength alongside her original compassion. Malakar's roar of fury shook the foundations of reality itself. "Impossible! The corruption cannot be reversed." "You're right," Lyra said, facing the fallen Primarch with newfound confidence. "It can't be reversed. But it can be transformed. Just like everything else." The cosmic being's form began to expand, drawing power from across multiple dimensions as he prepared to end this challenge to his philosophy once and for all. But as he gathered his strength, Etheron's presence manifested in the physical realm as well, bringing with him an army of beings Lyra had never seen before. "The evolutionaries," Kieran breathed in recognition. "I thought they were myths." "Every species that has ever learned to grow beyond their original limitations," Etheron explained as the cosmic forces arrayed themselves for battle. "Every being that chose cooperation over conquest, unity over isolation. They have been waiting for this moment since the first Walker's murder." The two armies faced each other across the ruined conversion camp, Malakar's forces of corruption and separation on one side, Etheron's champions of growth and unity on the other. Between them stood Lyra and Kieran, their bond blazing like a star that refused to be dimmed by cosmic darkness. "This ends now," Malakar declared, his power building to levels that threatened to tear holes in reality itself. "The natural order will be preserved, even if I have to remake all of existence to do it." "The natural order is change," Lyra replied, her own power rising to meet his challenge. "And it's time for the biggest change of all." But before either cosmic force could strike, a new presence entered the battlefield, one that made both Primarchs step back in shock. It was Marcus, but not the corrupted shadow thing he'd become. This was Marcus as he'd been originally created, before centuries of serving Malakar's cause had twisted him into something monstrous. And he wasn't alone. Behind him came every supernatural being who had ever been corrupted by the Shadow Master's influence, restored to their original natures but carrying the wisdom gained through their dark experiences. "You were right about one thing, Old Master," Marcus said to Malakar, his voice carrying new authority. "Conflict does drive evolution. But so does redemption. And some of us have learned which path leads to true growth. The fallen Primarch's expression contorted with rage and disbelief. You were mine. All of you. I made you what you are. You made us what we were, Marcus corrected. But he gestured to Lyra, showed us what we could become. And we choose evolution over stagnation, growth over corruption, unity over isolation. The tide of battle shifted in a way that no one had expected. This wasn't going to be a clash between cosmic forces of order and chaos, it was going to be a choice between two different visions of what evolution could mean. As the final confrontation began, Lyra felt something new stirring in her chest, not just her own power, but the combined strength of every being who had chosen growth over stagnation, love over fear, unity over division. Through the mate bond, she felt Kieran's absolute faith in her. Through her restored friendships, she felt the support of those she'd helped save from corruption. Through her cosmic heritage, she felt the approval of creation itself. She was no longer standing alone against the darkness. She was part of something greater, a web of connections that made everyone stronger while allowing them to remain themselves. Now, Etheron said quietly, show them what the first walker was truly meant to accomplish. And as the final battle erupted around them, Lyra reached across all dimensions to demonstrate what unity through diversity really meant, not the forced harmony that Malachar feared, but the voluntary cooperation that made all things possible. The ones who killed her family were finally here, and Lyra was ready for them. Then we fight, she said, her voice carrying the authority of cosmic law itself. Chapter 15. The blood moon rose like a crimson eye in the sky, its unnatural light turning the battlefield into something from a nightmare. But this wasn't just any lunar eclipse, it was the convergence prophesied since the dawn of creation, when the barriers between all realms would thin enough for fundamental change to take hold. Lyra stood at the center of the cosmic maelstrom, her power blazing with silver fire that pushed back against the corrupted red light above. Around her, the final battle raged with intensity that threatened to tear holes in reality itself. Malachar had abandoned all pretense of subtlety, manifesting his true form as one of the original architects of cosmic order. He towered above the battlefield like a mountain of living darkness, his very presence causing time and space to warp around him. This is your last chance, little bridge walker, he boomed, his voice carrying harmonics that made dimensional barriers tremble. Submit to the natural order, and I will grant you a clean death. Continue this foolishness, and I will make you watch as I unmake everything you've tried to protect. The natural order is evolution, Lyra replied, her voice somehow carrying just as much authority despite her much smaller form. And evolution means change, growth, the courage to become something better than what we were. She gestured to the beings fighting alongside her, supernatural creatures of every species working together with coordination that should have been impossible. Wolves fighting beside vampires, fae sharing power with witches, demons who had chosen redemption standing shoulder to shoulder with angels. This is what unity looks like, she continued. Not uniformity, not forced compliance, but voluntary cooperation between beings who remain fundamentally themselves while choosing to work toward common goals. Naive child, Malachar snarled. Their cooperation is temporary, born of shared fear. The moment the threat passes, they will return to their old conflicts and divisions. Maybe some will, Lyra admitted. But enough won't. And that's how change begins, with individuals choosing to be better, then inspiring others to do the same. Through the mate bond, she felt Kieran fighting desperately against a tide of corrupted angels, his shadow magic clashing with their twisted light in explosions that lit up the night sky. But he wasn't alone. Derek and his pack had joined the battle, along with Elena's tracking network and Kane's warrior contacts. Even more amazingly, she could sense supernatural leaders from across the globe converging on their location. The emergency call she'd sent out through her bridge magic was being answered by beings who had never worked together before but were willing to try for the sake of survival. This is what you were created for, Etheron's voice whispered in her mind. Not to force unity, but to make it possible. To show them that connection doesn't require the loss of identity. But even as hope swelled in her chest, Lyra felt the strain of maintaining her power at these levels. The blood moon's corrupting influence was working against her, trying to turn her bridge magic into something destructive. She could feel the temptation growing stronger with each passing moment, how much easier it would be to simply overwhelm her enemies with raw power instead of trying to redeem them. Why struggle with unity when you could have dominion? An insidious voice whispered in her mind. Why save those who would destroy you when you could destroy them first? For a terrifying moment, she almost listened. The corrupted moonlight felt so seductive, promising power without responsibility, victory without sacrifice. She could end this battle in seconds if she just let go of her naive notions about redemption. But then Beth appeared beside her, no longer corrupted but carrying new strength alongside her original compassion. "Don't listen to it," her friend said urgently. "I've been where that voice wants to take you. It promises everything and delivers nothing but emptiness." "How do you fight it?" Lyra asked, struggling against the blood moon's influence. "You remember why you're fighting," Beth replied simply. "Not for victory, but for the people you love. Not to prove you're right, but to give others the chance to choose something better." Through her enhanced senses, Lyra became aware of every individual on the battlefield, their fears, their hopes, their reasons for fighting. Some were there for power, others for survival. But many were fighting for the same thing she was, the chance to build a world where their children wouldn't have to face the same conflicts. That's when she realized what the blood moon's corruption was really trying to do. It wasn't just attempting to turn her power destructive, it was trying to make her forget that this battle was about more than just her personal victory or defeat. "You're afraid," she said suddenly, her revelation cutting through the cosmic din of battle. "You're afraid because you know that change is inevitable. The old order you're trying to preserve is already dying, and has been for centuries." Malakar's attack faltered for just a moment. "Impossible. The cosmic order is eternal." "The cosmic order is evolution," Lyra corrected. "And you've been fighting against it for so long that you've forgotten what you were originally created to protect." She reached out with her bridge magic, not trying to attack the fallen primarch but to show him something he'd lost sight of, the original purpose that had driven him to help create the cosmic order in the first place. "Protection," she whispered into his consciousness. "You weren't trying to preserve stagnation. You were trying to protect the right of all beings to exist and grow. But somewhere along the way, you confused preservation with prevention." For a moment, Malakar's corrupted form flickered, and Lyra caught a glimpse of what he'd been originally, a cosmic guardian whose job was to ensure that creation remained stable enough for growth to occur. The fallen primarch hesitated, confusion replacing certainty in his ancient voice. "I was protecting the natural order." "You were," Lyra agreed gently. "But the natural order includes change. Includes growth. Includes the right of beings to evolve beyond their original limitations." The blood moon above them began to flicker as the cosmic forces that had created it started to waver. Around the battlefield, corrupted creatures paused in their attacks, sensing that something fundamental was shifting in the nature of the conflict. But just as hope began to rise that the battle might end without total destruction, a new voice cut through the dimensional chaos, ancient, malevolent, and filled with power that dwarfed even the primarchs. "Enough." The true enemy revealed itself at last, not Malakar, who had been corrupted by something far worse, but the original source of all corruption. The thing that had been whispering in the darkness since before the dawn of creation, turning cosmic guardians against their purpose and beings against their nature. "I am the void that existed before creation," it spoke with a voice like dying universes. "I am the silence that will remain when all things end. And I will not allow this evolution to interfere with the inevitable return to nothingness." Understanding crashed over Lyra like a revelation that rewrote everything she thought she knew about the conflict. This wasn't about order versus chaos, or unity versus division. This was about existence versus entropy, growth versus decay, the fundamental choice between creating something new and returning to the void from which all things came. And the battle was just beginning. Chapter 16. The void's true form defied comprehension, an absence so complete it made reality scream just by existing. Where it touched the battlefield, beings simply ceased, not destroyed but erased from having ever been at all. Now you understand, Malachar said, his corrupted form beginning to stabilize as the truth became clear. I wasn't trying to preserve stagnation, I was trying to prevent this. The void feeds on change, on evolution, on anything that creates new possibilities. The more connected beings become, the more power it can drain when it consumes them. Lyra felt ice form in her veins as the implications hit her. The bridge magic. Every connection I create gives it more to destroy. Precisely, the void spoke with satisfaction that was somehow worse than hatred. Your unity makes the feast more satisfying. When I consume the bridge walker and all her connections, I will gain enough power to unmake creation itself. Around them, the supernatural beings who had been fighting moments before found themselves facing an enemy beyond their comprehension. This wasn't something they could battle with claws or magic, this was entropy itself, the force that would eventually claim every star, every world, every living thing. But as despair threatened to overwhelm her, Lyra felt something stirring through all her connections, not fear, but determination. The beings she had bridged weren't fleeing from the impossible enemy. They were drawing closer, forming a network of support that somehow made each individual stronger. You're right, she said quietly, addressing the void with newfound understanding. I am creating connections. Lots of them. Across species, across realms, across dimensions. And when I devour you, I devour them all, the void replied with anticipation. That's what you think, Lyra said, then smiled with genuine warmth. But you've forgotten something important about connections. They don't just flow one way. She reached out through every bridge she'd built, every bond she'd forged, every relationship she'd restored from corruption. But instead of drawing power from her connections, she began pouring her own essence into them. What are you doing? Kieran demanded through their mate bond, feeling her power flowing away from her and into the network of beings surrounding them. What I was always meant to do, she replied, feeling oddly peaceful despite the magnitude of what she was attempting. Not hoarding power, but sharing it. Not standing apart as a bridge, but becoming part of the structure I'm building. Through her fading awareness, she felt the network come alive in ways she'd never imagined possible. Every supernatural being connected to her began to glow with shared power, their individual abilities amplified by their connections to others while their unique natures remained intact. Wolves gained the wisdom of ancient vampires. Fae acquired the instinctive unity of pack bonds. Witches learned to channel their magic through the emotional connections that demons had always feared to embrace. And all of them together created something new, a living web of consciousness that was greater than the sum of its parts while celebrating the value of each individual thread. Impossible, the void raged as its attempts to consume the network met unexpected resistance. You cannot give away your power. You are the bridge walker. I'm not giving it away, Lyra corrected, feeling her individual consciousness beginning to merge with the larger network while somehow remaining herself. I'm investing it. In them. In us. In the future we're going to build together. The blood moon above them began to change, its corrupted red light shifting to silver as the celestial event responded to the fundamental alteration taking place below. This wasn't the forced unity that Malachar had feared or the destructive isolation that the void demanded, this was voluntary evolution, beings choosing to become more than they were while remaining true to who they had always been. Etheron's presence blazed with joy and pride. This is what the first walker was meant to accomplish. Not to become a permanent bridge between worlds, but to teach others how to build bridges themselves. Through the network, Lyra felt Kieran's understanding and his fierce determination to remain connected to her no matter what form their bond had to take. She felt Derek's alpha protectiveness expanding to encompass not just his pack but every being in the network. She felt Beth's newfound wisdom helping others navigate the balance between strength and compassion. And through it all, she felt the Void's growing desperation as it realized that its traditional weapons were useless against an enemy that refused to fight on its terms. "You think this changes anything?" the primordial force snarled. "I am inevitable. Entropy cannot be defeated. All things end, and I am that ending." "You're right," Lyra agreed, speaking now with the voice of the network itself. "All things end. But endings can be beginnings too. And sometimes, when something ends, it becomes part of something greater." The network reached out to the Void itself, not trying to destroy or banish it, but offering it something it had never been offered before, the chance to become part of creation instead of simply its ending. "Join us," the unified voice continued. "Not as the force that ends all things, but as the force that clears away what's no longer needed to make room for new growth. Entropy can be evolution too, if you choose to see it that way." For a moment that stretched across dimensions, the Void hesitated. Through the network's enhanced perception, Lyra could sense the cosmic entity's confusion and something that might have been longing, the desire to be part of creation instead of always standing outside it. But then the moment passed, and the Void's ancient hatred reasserted itself. "I choose nothing," it declared. "I am the ending. I am the silence. I am the peace that comes when all struggles cease." "Then you choose isolation," Lyra said sadly. "And isolation is the one thing our network cannot bridge. We're sorry you won't join us, but we won't let you prevent others from choosing connection." The final confrontation wasn't a battle in any traditional sense. It was a choice made by every being in the network simultaneously, the decision to affirm existence over entropy, growth over decay, love over the absence of all things. The Void raged and struck at them with power that could unmake galaxies, but found its attacks absorbed and transformed by the network's combined will. Where it tried to create endings, they created new beginnings. Where it sought to impose silence, they sang with united voices. Where it demanded isolation, they chose ever deeper connection. In the end, the primordial force of entropy simply faded. Not destroyed, but rendered irrelevant by beings who refused to fear the ending it represented. As the blood moon completed its cycle and returned to normal silver light, the supernatural world found itself fundamentally changed. The old divisions remained, wolves were still wolves, fae were still fae, vampires were still vampires. But now they were also part of something larger, connected by bonds of mutual understanding and support that would reshape how they interacted for generations to come. Lyra found herself standing in Kieran's arms, fully herself again but carrying within her consciousness the permanent awareness of her connection to every being in the network. She was no longer the bridge walker standing apart from all realms, she was simply part of the bridge that they had all chosen to build together. "Is it over?" Derek asked, his alpha senses trying to process the magnitude of what had just occurred. "The war is over," Lyra confirmed, looking around at the supernatural beings who were discovering their new connections with wonder and joy. "But the real work is just beginning." Around them, former enemies were reaching out to each other with tentative curiosity. Malachar, freed from the Void's corruption, was working with Etheron to understand how the cosmic order could evolve without losing its stability. Beth and the other former converts were helping others navigate the balance between individual identity and network connection. And in the distance, Lyra could sense other bridgewalkers beginning to awaken, beings in other dimensions and realities who were starting their own journeys toward unity through diversity. "What happens now?" Kieran asked, his golden eyes soft with love and wonder. Lyra smiled, feeling through their enhanced bond not just his love but the affection and support of hundreds of other beings who had chosen to be part of their extended family. "Now we go home," she said simply. "And we start building the future we want to live in." The war was over. The bridge had been built. And for the first time in cosmic history, the supernatural worlds were ready to work together as one great, diverse, beautiful family. But this wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. And the best was yet to come. Epilogue. 5 years later. Lyra stood on the observation deck of the Unity Center, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Below her, the city that had grown around the dimensional convergence point bustled with activity that would have been impossible just a few years ago. A pack of werewolves was working with a coven of witches to establish new trade routes between realms. Fate diplomats were negotiating cultural exchange programs with vampire courts. Former demons were teaching redemption therapy to beings struggling with their darker impulses. The world had changed. Not completely, there were still conflicts, still problems to solve, still beings who chose isolation over connection. But enough had changed that the future looked brighter than it had in millennia. Peaceful evening? Kieran's voice came from behind her, carrying the warmth that always made her heart skip a beat. Perfect evening, she corrected, turning to find him approaching with something small and glowing cupped in his hands. What do you have there? His smile was soft with wonder. See for yourself. She looked into his palms and gasped. A tiny spark of silver and gold light pulsed gently against his skin, not separate from him, but clearly its own distinct entity. Is that our daughter? Kieran confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. She's going to be born in about 6 months, and she wanted to say hello. Through the network, Lyra felt the baby's consciousness, ancient wisdom combined with innocent joy, power that dwarfed even her own, coupled with a spirit that chose love over everything else. This child would be something new, a being born from the unity they had fought to create. She's beautiful, Lyra whispered, gently touching the spark of light with one finger. It pulsed brighter at her touch, radiating contentment and love. She's going to be a bridge walker too, Kieran said. But different from you. Where you connected existing realms, she's going to help create new ones. Realities where the barriers between species never existed in the first place. The implications were staggering. Their daughter wouldn't just inherit the world they had fought to create, she would help it evolve even further, building bridges to possibilities they couldn't even imagine. Any word from the other dimensions? Lyra asked, settling against Kieran's side as they watched their future daughter's spirit dance between their hands. The Andromedan Bridgewalker has successfully united 3 galaxy clusters, he reported, his voice carrying pride for their distant colleague. The temporal Bridgewalker has resolved the time war that's been raging for the past 1,000 years. And the probability Bridgewalker has created stable timelines where the supernatural worlds never fell into conflict at all. Lyra smiled, feeling through the cosmic network the satisfaction of beings across multiple realities who were learning to work together despite their differences. The bridge magic hadn't been unique to her, it had been dormant in countless individuals across countless worlds, waiting for someone to demonstrate that unity through diversity was possible. Now that demonstration was spreading like ripples across the multiverse, inspiring evolution everywhere it touched. And Derek's announcement? She asked, remembering the message they'd received earlier that day. Kieran's expression grew warm with affection. The Moonridge Pack is officially establishing the first interdimensional pack council. Werewolves from 12 different realities are going to work together to develop new protocols for protecting pack members who travel between worlds. It was exactly the kind of practical application of bridge magic that Lyra had hoped for, not grand cosmic gestures, but simple cooperation that made life better for everyone involved. The spark of light in Kieran's hands pulsed again, and suddenly Lyra could hear their daughter's voice, not words, but concepts and emotions that conveyed meaning more clearly than language ever could. Love. Hope. Growth. Connection. The joy of becoming more than you were while remaining true to who you are. She understands, Lyra realized with wonder. She already understands what all of this is about. She should, Kieran replied, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. She's going to inherit a universe where understanding between different beings is the norm rather than the exception. As the sun set completely and stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Lyra felt a deep sense of completion. Not the ending of a story, but the fulfillment of a promise made long ago by the first walker who had given everything to make this future possible. "Ready to go home?" Kieran asked, carefully cupping their daughter's spirit as she settled into peaceful rest. "Always," Lyra replied, taking his free hand. "Ready to lead the next chapter together." They walked through the Unity Center's corridors, passing beings from dozens of species working together on projects that would benefit everyone. Some nodded respectfully as they passed, others waved with the casual familiarity of friends. A few of the youngest ones, beings born after the network's creation, barely seemed to notice that their leaders were anything special. Which was exactly how it should be. By the time they reached their own quarters, their daughter's spirit had settled completely into rest, content to grow quietly within the love and connection that surrounded her. In 6 months, she would be born into a world where being different was celebrated rather than feared, where cooperation was stronger than competition, where the bridges between all beings were built from mutual respect and genuine affection. As Lyra settled into sleep beside her mate, feeling through their bond his absolute contentment and through the network the peaceful satisfaction of thousands of connected souls, she smiled at the thought of all the adventures yet to come. The bridge walker's work was done. But the bridges she had helped build would stand forever, growing stronger with each being who chose connection over isolation, understanding over fear, love over everything else. And in the years to come, those bridges would carry them all toward a future brighter than any of them had ever dared to dream. The end.